Perfect. All right, got recording. Just want to make sure everything's good. I don't want everything to, I don't try to close all my programs and everything. All right, 3, 2, 1. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the 7th episode of the Long Lost Explorer podcast. My name is Sfisken, and I am your host. Today we have Anton, who is over in Minsk, Belarus. For those who don't know, there is a lot of things going on due to the presidential elections that happened. It looks like there might have been some corruption, some obvious corruption, which why most of the citizens are protesting it. And we've been getting a fairly weird amount of information and not necessarily clear information over in the US. So I wanted to bring light to the situation. And so I reached out to Anton online and he agreed to do the podcast. And I will not be saying his last name because of some reasons with the government and some of the censorship that's going on over there, which we'll be talking about. So please welcome Anton. Anton, hello.
Yeah, hi. It's nice to be here.
Oh, I could just tell. Even talking before, you were super excited to do this, and it seems like you have a lot of things that you want to say.
Yeah, I'm like a little bit nervous, but I'm also really excited to be doing that.
Instead of getting a morning tea, you should have just got a shot of vodka or whatever you drink. It would have relaxed you a little bit.
No, there's no way I would have done vodka.
Okay.
I mean,
What is
I wouldn't be able to talk at all if I got some vodka right now.
I know the Russian kind of stereotype is vodka over there. Do you guys have a stereotype for a drink, alcoholic drink over there, or is it just vodka because they lump you in?
Well, it's probably still vodka because we are essentially like all the post-Soviet countries are essentially the same culture, or at least similar in terms of their culture. Since vodka has been the traditional product made in Russia, well, it kind of stuck with literally every country.
Gotcha.
We're actually that not that far from Russia in terms of our own culture, and
Yeah.
Actually one of the most drinking nations worldwide. Like official statistics, no joke. One of the
Oh,
most
really?
drinking nations. Seriously, I'm serious. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Wow, I
I
didn't know
mean,
that. That kind of blows my mind.
yeah, it's true. I mean, there are some psychiatrists that have done statistics on alcohol consumption, and it's estimated that our healthcare costs. Just to clarify a little bit. Well, I'm also in the medical field, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and uh, and so I know a few things about here and there, and I might mention a few things. You've mentioned how you want to talk about the Corona situation, so we're probably
Yeah.
going to go down that rabbit hole for a bit. But anyways, here's the point I was trying to make. Our healthcare is essentially free, which means that the government pays for the vast majority of it.
Mm.
And also, the government is in charge of alcohol selling. And it's been estimated by psychiatrists that the costs of healthcare associated with alcoholism are actually 10 times higher than the profit that is made from selling alcohol. Which is
Wow.
actually, it's absolutely insane if you think about it.
Yeah. And do you feel like it's because I don't know too much about Belarusian economics, but do you believe it's due to the poverty in your country with the high alcoholism?
I wouldn't say it's high poverty. I would say a lot of it is tradition. Um, I mean, back in the USSR, the way to keep people quiet and happy was to actually feed them with alcohol.
Oh, I
People
didn't say.
who
Sorry,
people
hold on.
worked
Sorry,
a
sorry
lot
to interrupt.
in.
Sorry to interrupt. I didn't say high
Yeah.
quality.
Okay,
I
okay,
said
sure.
poverty. Like basically, since Belarus is kind of a poorer country.
Yeah, this is. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to do with poverty. Yeah, we
Oh,
are
okay.
a poor country, but I think it has a lot more to do with culture. It has a
Mm,
lot more to do with culture rather than poverty, in my opinion.
okay.
Because, it has been traditionally an agricultural country for a lot of its existence, and
Hmm.
it's hard work for the people. So they would gather, they would drink alcohol. There's like a famous tradition of like gathering by three people. So it's because a bottle of vodka would be enough for three people to spend the evening comfortably.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
And
definitely.
a lot of those, a lot of those a lot of those agricultural companies were actually supplied with alcohol quite a lot to keep the people happy. So, it's more of a tradition rather than anything. And we see that younger generations who were not brought up by the USSR, they're actually consuming much less alcohol than the older generations. It's because
Interesting.
the tradition kind of changes with time.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
another
definitely.
curious fact is that actually uh, well, another curious fact is the wages, actually. You mentioned that it's because we're poor, but there was an interesting experiment. People in some areas have all of a sudden started receiving more money. It was one of the economical acts for support and stuff. And we didn't see a surge in the quality of life. In fact, we saw a surge in consumption of heavier alcohol. So people, so yeah, so people who earned more, they didn't stop consuming alcohol. They just started consuming heavier alcohol because they could afford it, like more expensive, more better one.
Interesting. Oh wow, that's crazy. Yeah, I'm familiar with the culture just because if anything, Russian and Belarusian is somewhat similar. I feel like to the most part. I feel like you could probably say a lot of differences and stuff, but I feel like yeah, just going out and having a barbecue at the park and stuff like that. You have your shishlik, your vodka, your tomatoes, and vegetables and stuff like that. It's just it was just a common thing. So I just noticed I didn't necessarily drink a lot of vodka, but I drank it frequently when I was over there, just because it was just kind of like, oh, we're here,
Oh
we're
yeah,
relaxing. Here, have some vodka. Here, have some alcohol, and stuff like that. So yeah, that is something I kind of noticed and was kind of interesting. So um, kind of going.
yeah. People
Oh
people really love their vodka, and it's cheap and easy to make, and it's 40% alcohol, so it's easy to
yeah,
get drunk.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So I kind of want to just jump in with everything that is going on. So I know you kind of basically
Yeah,
prepared everything. So I just want I'm not going to ask that many or I'm just going to ask questions and just chime in. But I just want to basically give you this platform. So with the election and just politics in general, kind of start from the beginning and go back as far as
I-
you want, going up to the elections and up to now and what you see forward. I see that that's the direction of the conversation I want to go to. So, what happened?
yeah. Actually, well, let me start a little bit from a little bit from something different. Let's talk about
Okay.
the elephant in the room, because I've also made the image for the podcast, and I want to know your impressions on it. Like this is a compilation of some photos that are of the things that are currently going on, and
Hmm.
I'm curious as to what your opinion on this is. Like, what
You
do you
know,
see? What
I
what
I
sparks your
I
attention?
I am so with everything that's going on with the riots. God, I feel like I'm being interviewed. I like this. So I feel like what I see everything going on in with the riots and the protest in my country, I feel like they are two very different things. Obviously, one, we're not dealing with elections. Um, when I go on Reddit and when I go on media posts, I do approach it with some skepticism, just because media can twist things a little bit, but and you have to kind of see how the people are interacting with the cops. So are the cops justified to attack their citizens if there's justification for it? So let's just say in our country, I see a lot more angrier and more violent riots in our country. And so sometimes when people record it, they tend to depict it as the cops being bad, and they selectively edit it out. But a lot of the footage I've been seeing over in your area, it seems like things were just pretty calm. I mean, most of the videos I've seen, like there was a car driving by, and this cop just takes a baton and just smashes one of the windows as the car was driving by, and he eventually arrests kind of like an older man or something like that. And you could clearly see these long videos with a lot more context, um, with just straight up corruption by the police, the Spetsnaz. I think it is. I don't know if it's Spetsnaz that's out there or just the actual just police. I'm pretty ignorant on this, so please correct me. If I'm wrong on anything, but it does seem like there is much less or no justification for how the police are treating your citizens, and it seems like everything is really peaceful. They're not rioting. They're not, shooting anything or attacking the cops in any way. They're just kind of they're being a lot more peaceful than they are here, and they're still attacking and beating the hell out of them. So it looks really bad from what I've seen. But again, I'm approaching it, just without a bias or anything. And so far, what I have seen, it does not look good for the government and the police.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm sorry. Uh, First and foremost, the media. I believe there's a lot of information wars going on right now, and not all of the media can be trusted.
Yeah.
That's absolutely for sure. This is like a topic that I want to briefly mention. I'm going to briefly mention later because information is being manipulated left and round as to what is going on. But generally, if we're starting from like the image, then this is pretty much a compilation of how things appear right now, at least. It's that there are a lot of peaceful protesters, and the first days of the riots, we've seen insane violence when it comes to the people who participated. You can see, well, the image. Let me explain like the image a little bit and my idea behind it as to why I made it. So essentially, it's the white, red, white flag, which is a historical flag of Belarus when it received its independence. Well, as the white stripes, I've decided to like spread them into what is actually happening and how there is violence going on. So what is happening actually, for the most part, is that people are making very, very peaceful protests. Uh, so you see lines of yeah, you see people making huge lines of support. You see people making large crowds chanting that they are demanding freedom, that they want our president to go away. There's in the middle of this, there is a girl with a poster that says "We are love," and it's kind of the theme behind it because we are not a violent nation. It's not like the U.S. where the people just riot, they loot, they destroy everything. The biggest protest by far has occurred yesterday. So we're recording it. For me, it's Saturday morning, and the biggest protest actually occurred yesterday on Friday evening. A lot of people went to Independence Square, and essentially the whole street was filled with thousands of people. There was no force used, actually zero force used. There were people standing in front of important buildings, protecting them, but they weren't doing anything. There were just a few people with shields and in full suits of armor, but they weren't really like fighting anything. They weren't protecting anything really. They were just standing there, and there was a peaceful crowd like right in front of them.
Hmm.
There were some, there were some buses with militia, with police that came around, circling with like riot police, with some military. They were circulating around. They were parking nearby. People have seen that, but no forceful measures were taken against the protesters, and they simply left afterwards. And I think the two biggest things that impressed me the most and that show how peaceful our nation really is that people started gifting flowers to riot police that were standing in front. There were girls who ran at them and hugged them, kissed them, like took pictures was standing by with them.
Hmm.
They gave them flowers. They put flowers on their shields, like literally.
Yeah.
It was amazing. And another thing is that everybody left and there was no trash. Everybody took out the trash, so the street was clean before people started protesting, and the street remained clean after people stopped the protest.
One
Which
thing
is
I did
actually
notice, one thing I have noticed with your culture, you guys really do pick up after yourself, and that's different
us.
from a lot
Sorry.
of,
I,
yeah, just your the not the, even the Belarusian, but just the Slavic culture I've noticed uh is very clean. You guys, it's kind of ingrained in the culture to kind of clean up after yourself. And I noticed that in just kind of around your area. I might be wrong about some other Slavic cultures, but I noticed that it seems like the culture is very good at picking up their trash.
it's true. We are actually our cities are incredibly clean. Actually, one of the cleanest ones in probably the entire world. It's like
Hmm.
part of the culture as well to be clean and peaceful and so on. So,
Yeah.
anyways, let me continue about the image. So I've mentioned briefly flowers, and it's a tradition that has, well, it's not really a tradition, but it's an emerging tradition of sorts for these riots. Is that people buy a lot of flowers. They are covering the streets with flowers. They're always shown with flowers. They put flowers in places where people died during the first days of the riots. It's kind of interesting and it's kind of really cute in my opinion. It just goes to show a little bit more humanity with our
Hmm.
people. But then on the bottom half is the stuff that is all the bad stuff that is happening. I mean, at the center of it is, well, the one person that we are going to talk about a lot today, who's currently in power. And then to the sides of it is the violence that's shown against the people. Uh, and most of it, I would say, is true. So, these are pictures taken by the people. You can see that the riot police are shooting at people. I mean, you've mentioned how you've seen them hit cars, and it's absolutely true. They've been just stopping drivers, taking them out, breaking their cars, and then detaining the drivers. There's footage of it, right? So
Hmm.
it's not like any of that stuff is being manipulated. I mean, you can see a protester two, in fact, photos of protesters that are just being ganged up on. And one of those protests, it's like actually there's a series of photos of him. Well, not a series, but like two photos of him. On the first photo, you can see this protester, or maybe I shouldn't say protester. It's just a random guy, a civilian, You can see him trying to hand flowers to the riot police. And then on the second photo, they're just hitting him. They're just hitting him. They're just beating him up, trying to detain him.
Hmm.
And some of the more horrible things you see on the right, it's the people suffering amidst those protests from bullet wounds, from being beaten down, from all the flashbangs and such. And the most shocking one was actually the police beating up a 5-year-old girl who is sitting there in the corner. And it's actually quite unreal. Some more photos have started emerging recently as well because they've been releasing people from detention, and a lot of those people from detentions they have some really severe wounds. It's
Hmm.
absolutely inhumane what is being done to them in prisons right now.
Yeah. Yeah, Jesus.
Well,
5 years old.
anyways,
I just want to ask, why do you think they would attack like a 5-year-old? Is it like to send out a message?
well, let me put it like this: everything that they are doing, like trying to bust riots using heavy force, all of it is indeed to send the message. And the message is that you shouldn't be rioting. The message is that, the message is that you shouldn't be protesting the regime.
Hmm.
All of it is there. But attacking a 5-year-old, it's just absolutely inhumane. Beating up prisoners, taking people out of cars, beating up their cars for no reason whatsoever, killing people with excessive force when they haven't done anything. This is all just way too much.
Mm. Yeah.
I would say my opinion on riot police. Well, riot police is a topic that we can go down a little bit as well later. But in my opinion, they're just hounds. Like they're trained to take orders, and they are absolutely inhumane. They just they're literally bloodhounds. They have an order and they're gonna do it. Like if the order says like kill 10 people or something, they're just gonna do it. It's like no
Yeah.
matter what. Maybe there's like some humane side to them, because we've seen we haven't seen the really bloody protests that occurred in the first 3 days, because the first 3 days they were absolutely the worst. The riot police just started flash banning people and shooting people out of nowhere, absolutely out of nowhere. And the last couple of days, they were really, really peaceful. There weren't a lot of detained people. There were not very few, but like relatively few injuries. And most of the injured people that have started coming in were actually people that were released from detention centers.
Hmm.
So like the people who went out in the first days suffered the most. And right now, a lot of peaceful citizens that were never going to resort to any violence are coming out. Like there's a lot more of them.
Hmm. Have you actually been
Well,
in? Have you actually been out, or have you just been staying inside?
I've been mostly staying inside. After all, I actually wanted to do this podcast.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
you
this is your
expected
form
me
of
here.
protest.
Yeah, you can manipulate, or not manipulate things, but you can help in numerous different ways. You can go out and you can join those protests. You can also spread the word, and I've been trying to mostly spread the word about it. So
Yeah.
it's kind of my way of doing protests.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, there is a lot of different forms of it, and it's obviously we're going to go into it, but you are basically what you were saying right now and doing is technically illegal.
uh, you mean? What do
Just in
you
your
mean by
country and speaking out against the government and pointing out their corruption.
I wouldn't say there's like an official law that says you can't spread any information about the government, but there is one law. There's one law that I don't know if I mentioned it before we started recording, or maybe when we were testing the connection and stuff.
Yeah.
But there's one criminal law actually that prohibits lying and like infringing on the not infringing, but like what is the word that I'm looking for? But like, well, basically spreading lies, false rumors, and stuff about the president. So like lowering his status, lowering his reputation, and all of that.
Yeah.
It's actually illegal, and it's a criminal act that is punishable.
Yeah.
But I am not going to be spreading any lies or false information. Everything that I am about to say today is either available completely on the internet. You can search for all of those things, because I've also searched for all those things. People do get their information out of somewhere.
Mhm.
And second of all, those are going to be my opinions, and I'm not stating those as facts. You can disagree with me on every opinion that I present. That's no big issue here. Oh, and one of the other things that I wanted to address, well, you you uh, went on with some other thought, and I wanted to comment on it previously, but now I've just remembered my comment right now. So, about the information wars, in my opinion, the most objective way to assess any situation is by being an outside observer of it. So,
Hmm.
if you're involved in a situation, then it becomes a lot more difficult for you to be absolutely critical and non-judgmental about what is going on. Uh, I may not be the best person when it comes to assessing the situation from the outside because
Hmm.
I live in the country. I see the people. I know a lot of people who have been going out, and I'm also rooting for the for things to change as well because this is my form of protest,
Hmm.
as well.
Yeah.
So my perspective is actually skewed, but I also try to remain as impartial as possible. So a lot of things that I'm going to be talking about, um, they're not really a matter of my own opinion. They're a matter of how things were, like a historical kind of perspective on things.
Hmm. Yeah.
Uh, well, and on the other hand, I think that when it comes to my opinions, it would be interesting for people to hear them because not a lot of people talk about Belarus outside of Belarus.
Hmm.
So everybody has been completely in the dark as to what our political situation has been. The EU has made some sanctions. The US has both the EU and the US have not recognized any of the constitutional changes and elections after 1994. So people have been aware, sort of, that we're living in a somewhat bad situation.
Hmm.
Even a lot of the outsiders that I've talked about, when they ask you about Belarus, they ask you like, how does it feel to live in a dictatorship? So people are aware of it to a point,
Hmm.
but they also don't know just how bad things can get realistically.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that um, after every major political event in our country, there's been some kind of disaster worldwide to literally distract the attention out of our situation.
Hmm.
Like the major and well, there's a list of it. I'm not gonna mention all of them. I'm not gonna probably mention like probably not gonna make any really good examples here, but you can find the lists of those events. It's like major political event and then some global catastrophe. And I'm literally not joking you. Like 9/11 in terms of US happened maybe like a day or two after the elections in Belarus took place, and one of the most important ones too, because Lukashenko remained in power
Hmm.
to
Oh,
make some more
interesting.
changes. Uh, and then there were terroristic acts, there were some major protests in the world, so everybody was distracted from us. And now we are slowly becoming the center of attention. So this is partially what I'm hoping for as well, because once you reach a critical mass, there's no turning back. You know, the protests are kind of reaching that critical mass right now, in my opinion, because the world is becoming a lot more focused on us than it has ever been. The protests are becoming larger than they have ever been, and the distrust for Lukashenko and his government has become so severe that this critical mass has been reached right now, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is really interesting because you guys are just a little country next to Russia. I mean, that's all I thought about it, and I was obviously interested to visit because you are, grouped together in with the Slavic culture, and I thought would be an interesting place to go. But with the COVID-19 thing happening, I didn't really, I wasn't able to go. But I'm still interested in seeing your country. It looks beautiful, and it's sad to hear that you guys have what it sounds like to be a lot of corruption going on right now.
Well, yeah, it's true. And we're going to start looking at the situation like we've already probably outdone ourselves in terms of introductions and such.
Hmm.
So I feel like it's an appropriate time to start talking about what is actually going on, what's been happening in our country. And you're probably going to see that the corruption was there from like the very start of it. It's just been very well hidden until pretty much recently.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, let's start. So
anyway,
start from the beginning. Let's go to the beginning, and as far back as you want to to what's led up to this.
okay, so I'm not a historian. This is one of the weaker links, weaker like uh, talents of mine. But I want to briefly mention the flag again. So the white, red, white flag, which is a symbol of Belarusian independence. If you compare the two flags, the white, red, white flag and the one right now, you can see some major differences, obviously. And you might be wondering why we are using the white, red, white flag. What's the meaning behind it? Because it's shown everywhere in the protests,
Hmm.
and why people are not happy about the new one. So the white, red, white flag is a traditional symbol of Belarusian independence because it was the first flag that was used when Belarus became independent from Russia, actually. And it might be like, and it was a long while ago. It was 1912 or 1918 or something like this. Well, it was at the beginning of the 20th century, in fact. So the white, red, white flag represents independence, and there's a historical rumor as to how it appeared. Well, first and foremost, Belarus was traditionally called Belorussia at
Hmm.
first, which means white Russia. Uh, so our tradition was to wear white clothes, was to essentially associate ourselves with white, as in also pure. And this purity is also why we're trying to remain peaceful and why our protests are also trying to remain peaceful. There are a lot of people purchasing white flowers. I mean, you can see on the pictures that there are a lot of red ones, white ones, and yellow ones, and well, all kinds of flowers. But the vast majority of protesters are also using white color, white flowers as a symbol of peace and that we're a very calm nation that is peaceful and friendly.
Hmm.
Uh, but there's also a historical excurse one can do in terms of the wars that we've been fighting. Our country has seen a lot of wars, and we were at the front side of them because we're kind of the country that separates Europe and Russia. And so a lot of the things that were happening both in Europe and Russia have affected us. When we were also part of Russia, we were like on the verge essentially of becoming Europe too. Uh, but uh, uh, but but anyways, uh, so anyways, here's what I'm trying to. Here's the point I'm trying to make. Well, when one of the wars was fought, one of the one knyaz, which is well, the biggest political figure, which was like the head of a country back in the day. It's what he was called. He went in battle, and his forehead got wounded, so he was bleeding, and he put white cloth over it to continue the fight and to fight for his independence. So
Hmm.
this white cloth, it became bloody red with, well, there was this red stripe according to the legend, and this white cloth became the symbol of Belarusian independence. So literally this flag is like white piece of cloth with blood in it, which is a symbol that we are fighting for our own independence.
Interesting.
Uh, anyways, so let's continue. We have been an independent country from Russia ever since. Realistically, there
Hmm.
has there has been a lot going on in the Soviet Union, which is a union where everybody tried to help everybody, and eventually it fell apart in 1991. which is no secret to anyone. So after that, the countries were on really bad terms with each other, especially Belarus, because Belarus was then regulated by the parliament. There was no president back in 1991, and the country slowly descended into poverty because we wanted to remain independent from anybody, but we also were not a very advanced country at the time. We don't really have any natural resources like oil or gas. Most of the stuff that we sell in terms of gas and oil comes from Russia even nowadays. But people slowly started descending into really huge poverty. There was a lot of corruption, there was a lot of crime because of that, and the people were starting to feel threatened quite a lot. I mean, our survival was essentially on the line, and the parliament didn't really want to. The parliament didn't really want to take care of the situation properly. A lot of it was corrupted heavily as well.
Mm-hmm.
At least, well, that's what I'm led to believe. I'm not I'm not a historian. I haven't studied excessively those events, but this is my general impression of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what a lot of like major politicians who are savvy in terms of this era, this is how they describe the situation as well. Well then, so in 1994, the parliament made a decision that we are going to now become a presidential republic. So elections had to be conducted. We had to choose a president, and he would represent us. Our constitution back then implied that we would have a president. He would take care of some executive stuff, but not more than that. Like, he was still severely limited by the parliament, by the jurisdiction, by laws, by legislative power. Um, Essentially, it was kind of like a kind of like a westernized republic. We were trying to become more Western, more acquainted with other countries who were seen as more progressive and being able to maintain their own independence, being able to take care of their own people, which was a very good goal because we would be receiving some support that we needed. But this turned awry quite quickly. So in 1994, Lukashenko was elected as the president of Belarus. So I wanted to also talk a little bit about him. Well, there's going to be a lot of talk about him because he's been in charge for 26 years. And most of the bad things, there are some good things that he's done, let me put it like this, but there are also a lot of bad things that he has done. Before those elections, he has been a relatively minor politician, actually, but he has strived towards perfection, like further and further. And one of the most notable things is that in 1994, when he eventually came in power, before the 1994 elections, I mean, he actually opposed the regime himself then. He would try to remove people on official terms. He addressed legislative power to remove certain people from power. He was essentially the leader of the opposition back then, because he also organized protests. He even got beaten up himself. Like, you see a lot of people suffering now because they're beaten up from being protesters. He was actually one of the protesters back then, and he was one of the people trying to lead the opposition against the regime that was back then.
How ironic.
Yep. It's actually one of the reasons I think he fears the opposition so much. It's because he himself was the person who led the opposition and who was successful in taking down a really bad regime. So it's like he literally knows from the inside how to manipulate the situation in his advantage. And
Mm.
he knows that if he suppresses the roots, then there won't be the big problem. But we're also going to be talking about his mistakes, in my opinion, in terms of his ruling.
Mm.
So anyways, the situation in 1994, it sucked absolutely. It was absolutely horrible. People were fighting for independence, but this came at a huge loss because we weren't a strong economical country back then, and we have never actually been strong economically on our own. This has not changed. I mean, you've already asked me about your own impression of the country. You said that people live in poverty, and a lot of it is true. I mean, we
Mm.
have some of the lowest wages in any of the modern countries of the world. There was a lot of inflation back then. There was no food for people. People were making lines to get some bread, like huge lines. People had no idea when their next meal would come. I mean, this situation is commonly described in the USSR during Stalin's regime, when people were hungry, were shelterless, when they were trying to fight for their own survival. And it's
Mm.
kind of the situation that is being described as well for Belarus in 1994. There was a lot of corruption amongst government officials, and the crime rate was also through the roof because people were trying to fight for their survival. So crime is always gonna skyrocket when people are in trouble. When it comes to Lukashenko, he was trying to fight the regime. He went into legislative power to try and make legislative. He went into legislative power to try and remove certain people from working within the government. He was directly opposing them. He was having debates with them. He kept saying that these people are corrupted, that they need to be removed, and that our country would only get better without them. And he also proposed some really simple ideas for the people, ones that they really needed to hear back then. He just kept his program to some very, very simple statements, like we would be fighting corruption, we would be fighting crime, we would be feeding you, and then to feed you uh, making some good, I mean, not make, well, we would be asking Russia for help. uh, so we have no gas, we have no money, we have no oil, all of those things. We are going to contact Russia, we're going to become friendly with them, they are going to support us, and then when we eventually when we eventually break through, when the crisis is over, we're going to remain independent, free, and have a really, really good life.
Mm.
So these ideas were really well received by the people. They were simple and easy to understand. Like, we're going to do this and we're going to receive this. So it's very understandable for them. And in terms of his personality, he has been really ruthless all the time, fearless, impulsive, and his manner of speech is also like that. We're going to talk about his personality a little bit later on, which is a specific point that I want to mention. But those ideas sounded convincing, and he also sounded convincing because he seemed like a person who just came out of the common people. Uh, he uh, he seemed like common folk, like most of the most of the country back then has been common folk. Like, they've been specialized in agriculture. They've been normal people trying to live their lives, and he seemed like one of those people back then. So in a way, he was. So in a way, he was the most representative candidate for the people because he was proposing their own interests. He was actually he was saying what the people wanted to hear back then, in my opinion. And this is how the first elections went, because it had two two rounds of there were two rounds of elections. In the first rounds, he had about 45% of the votes, and then in the second round, he had 80% of the votes.
Yeah.
Which means he won. And I'm gonna return to those 80% because I just keep the number in mind for now. You might already be familiar with that number from the recent elections as well.
Yeah.
I'm gonna talk a little bit about it, like give my opinion on it. And those were the most legitimate elections by far by the Belarusians. It's like there was a lot of corruptions, but there also was no real political interest in falsifying any elections for one of the candidates. The most popular candidates were actually, they weren't part of some major party. They were just, they were partyless essentially at that point.
Yeah, I see that they were independent.
Yep. And there was no interest in falsifying elections. So those 80% were legitimate. And those elections were acknowledged as unbiased, fair, and true by pretty much everybody in the world. So this is about the 1994 situation. Well, I'm going to move to the post-election things. Maybe there's something that you would like to discuss here.
The post-election?
No, the elections themselves. Like, is there anything that maybe isn't so very clear in my explanations?
No, everything's kind of good so far. I'm just kind of I'm sitting in the back seat. And I'm just letting you drive, so I'm just taking all of this in right now. So you just keep going on and explaining everything. It's just fascinating me.
Oh, sure. Anyway, so after the elections, a lot of the problems started to emerge with Lukashenko. Essentially, as the people say it, in his first 2 years of reign, his true colors started to show up. There is a very famous person called Yuri Zakharenko, who was the minister of the Ministry of the Internal Affairs. I'm gonna address it as MIA, or maybe like Internal Affairs, just so we're clear from now on, because there's gonna be a lot of talk about internal affairs as well, probably. Anyways, there's a really famous quote on him that his true colors started showing up like within the first year after he was elected. That he said that he, as a minister, had to enforce any kind of order that the president gave him, or else he would be jailed, detained, and, well, taken care of, to put it simply. And a lot of people report the same kind of thing, is that he essentially wanted to grab all the power for himself. He wanted everybody to kind of obey his orders. Like, he knew everything, he was going to do everything, but he needed all the people simply to obey. And Yuri Zakharenko is also a person that we're going to be mentioning quite a bit, so I want you to remember him. So he was the Minister of Internal Affairs back when Lukashenko started his presidency. And he also said one of the most important things that I want you to keep in mind about the regime overall. It's one of the best descriptions that I have heard so far. So he said that if you work well, you'll just keep working in your own place. But if you obey the commands that you are given, then you're going to get promoted to the higher ups. Needless to say, well, he was fired very, very quickly. He was fired like the following after the first year of Lukashenko's presidency. He said that he told the president the truth, the whole truth, and he wouldn't bend. Essentially, he wouldn't back away from it. He wouldn't bend. He would say that certain things were impossible for him to do, and so on. He gave him a run for his money, essentially. Anyways, then one of Lukashenko's supporters, also Viktor Gonchar, he became the head of the Central Election Commission. It's a commission that in our country counts all the votes, and there's Lydia Yermoshina. I don't know if you've heard her. She's a public figure in our country, but maybe not to an outside observer. But she's been in charge for a very long time, counting votes for him, and many people believe that she's in charge of corrupting and falsifying the elections as well. So, anyways,
Mm-hmm.
back then, Viktor Gonchar, he was actually one of the representatives of Lukashenko back in 1994, and so he received a place in charge of the election committee. But he very quickly started seeing that Lukashenko was trying to do some really bad things. He made numerous how do I say this? Well, shit, I'm forgetting the word. Well, anyways, he broke the constitution quite a lot, and he was a Gonchar, I mean, and Gonchar was in charge of uncovering all of those allegations.
Mm-hmm.
He was the person who tried to initiate the president's impeachment actually in 1996. So in his 2 years, in his 2 years of presidency, starting from 1994 to 1996, there were a lot of conflicts going on between the president, Lukashenko, and the parliament, because Belarus had previously been a parliamentary country, and now it was striving to become a presidential republic. So the parliament had a lot of rights, and the president had a few rights, but not nearly as much as the parliament. The parliament was still in charge. Lukashenko was trying to break the constitution quite a lot. He wanted to have absolute power over pretty much everything, and a lot of conflicts between him and the parliament started to occur. So in 1996, when the president's impeachment was brought in question, people proposed, I mean, not people, but the parliament and the president both, they proposed to make changes to the constitution. It was the first referendum, and there were a whole bunch of questions regarding the constitution, the state of affairs in Belarus, which were raised. And so let me look up my notes a little bit. Well, anyways, so the constitutional changes in 1996 were actually won by the president. So his propositions to change the constitution received the most amount of votes, which were presumed to be rigged back then. And when the president's constitutional changes came in place, Viktor Gonchar was fired. The impeachment that was supposed to occur just sort of died down by that point.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk. Let me briefly mention the most important ones from 1996. So essentially, the president has at that point became one of the main branches of power. Essentially, there are always talks of three main branches of power, but the president actually became a fourth, and he sort of became on top of them. Like, he could make any of the decisions pretty much in the country. I'm gonna talk a little bit later about the system. We have a few things to look at. So previously, the parliament could conduct national referendums. Now the president could. So it means that by having falsifiable elections and being able to conduct nationwide referendums, he could essentially make any changes to the constitution that he would deem necessary. Then he could also choose the highest representatives of the country. He could choose the government's highest general attorney, He could choose all the ministers. He could also choose the head of the Central Election Commission, which he did. He fired Gonchar and chose another person. I would say Lydia Ermoshina, who is the current one, but I'm not sure if she became the head since 1994 or 1996. So I'm gonna omit that. And also, he could choose all of the judges of the high court system. In fact, a lot of the people showed their disregard for the constitution. The prime minister left his post, and a lot of the judges from the higher court, they also left their position as a sign of protest. But it didn't really matter because he could essentially put any person that he wanted in power now.
Oh.
And also, he gave himself legislative rights, so he could make decrees from now on. And what's interesting is that presidential decrees were actually above any of the current laws. So if they contradicted any of the current laws, or if there was any question about legislation, then presidential decrees would be considered as the highest form of truth at that point.
I'm already seeing the recipe for disaster.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is and mind that we are talking 1996 at this point, right?
I know. Yeah. We have a long way to go.
Yeah.
So
I
keep
mean,
going.
not a lot has changed. Not a lot has changed since that point. But you can see that the corruption was there from the start of it, like literally from the very start of it.
Yeah.
So anyways, Gonchar was still one of the leaders of the opposition back then, and he was preparing proof that Lukashenko is an illegitimate president. Also, Yuri Zakharenko, who we previously mentioned as the Minister of Internal Affairs, he was removed from his post, and he actually became one of the first leaders of the opposition within the country. He was very respected, especially by the military men who served under him. The first opposition had a lot of military people within them, and it was absolutely horrific for the president. I mean, when the military rebels against you, it's scary to say the least.
Oh yeah.
And Zakharenko was also a really smart person. I mean, if you listen, I mean, you don't know Russian, sadly, but the people who know Russian, they can listen to some of the things that he said, and he represents himself as a very smart, very critical person. He has like an aura of he shines with trust, when you put it like this. Like he just looks like a person who you can trust, who you can put your trust into. So anyways, the opposition started gathering around him, and the movement was starting to spark. They were doing the same kind of things that people are doing right now. That were using the white, red, white flag, and they were marching. They were standing in front of major buildings in the city, protesting the government, saying that the government is becoming more and more corrupt, and that Lukashenko should be impeached and stuff. But the movement suddenly stopped when Zakharenko just mysteriously disappeared one day. And then the same thing happened to Gonchar. Gonchar was trying to gather proof that Lukashenko was an illegitimate leader, that he has broken a lot of the constitutional rights, that he's trying to achieve absolute power. But all of that failed as well, because he was the second leader of the the second major leader of the opposition, and the same fate happened to him as well. Like literally a few days before he was going to present the proof that he had found, he just mysteriously disappeared as well. In 2001, a few reports were filed on some higher-ups that they were involved in the disappearance of both of those. Well, those are just two major people, right? There were a lot more like them. The people who supported them financially and politically, a lot of them also disappeared without a trace. It was also confirmed by the Minister of Internal Affairs that a few pistols with silencers were given out on the days of their disappearances. So their fate remains unknown, but no real investigations have been conducted right now. We sadly will never know the truth, what happened to them, but we can presume what happened to them. They are very, very likely dead. Anyways, and one of the last changes about the general electoral process and the referendums that we need to note about is that another referendum was conducted in 2004, and it was a referendum that removed a very small line from the constitution, but it's probably one of the most important lines ever. Previously, the president was to be elected for a maximum of 2 terms. So like 8, well, I won't say 8, but realistically, it's like more like 10 years, right?
Yeah, it's 10 years because you have elections every 5 years, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right now, it's at first it was every 4 years, but I believe it's every 5 years or so.
Okay.
So anyways, before that, the president could only apply for 2 terms and then he would have to leave. But then the referendum was conducted and this line was removed. So like he could be a president for pretty
Forever.
much however much the president wants. Like if he's elected again, he can be the president. It doesn't matter, no limits on presidential terms.
It sounds like Vladimir Putin took a few notes from him.
Yep. That's
See, now I'm connecting the dots now. I'm seeing this. This is really interesting.
Yeah. So next up, I want to talk about how the power is spread in our country. So it's no longer a historical kind of thing, but it's what is currently going on. Like this is not any kind of confidential information. It's completely available on the internet, just like everything that I have talked about previously. So here's how the power is in our country spread between certain instances. So we have, I want to say 4 branches because the president is himself a kind of a branch, but he's also above all of them. So he's pretty much the highest instance in our country right now. And you're going to see why. Under him are the 3 traditional branches of power that are also present in most countries. There's an executive branch, which is presented by the prime minister and all of the other ministers. So we have a lot of things like the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Ministry of Health, and so on. So these are essentially major companies that take care of something in the country. At the head of them is the prime minister, and this is the executive branch. So essentially, they are executing the president's orders. It's really simple, you know. Executive branch just takes care of the of the political course that the country has decided for itself. Since the president is the main person who decides our political course, then there's nothing out of the ordinary here, right? Because they simply execute what is being told to them.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a reminder as well. So all of the prime ministers and all of the ministers are elected by the president, right? They can be elected by the president. Well, not can be, but they actually are. Legitimately actually are from his own agreement. Then a more subtle one, which is the legislative branch. And it has 2 parts to it, which is one is the lower, called the House of Representatives, and the representatives are chosen locally into it. And then there is a higher one, which is the Council of the Republic. It consists of 64 members. Each major region elects up to 8 representatives, and also 8 are chosen by the president. So they're in charge of making laws essentially, and they decide the political course, and the executive branch then later enforces those rules. So let me see. Well, actually, it doesn't seem like too bad of a deal, right? Because it's mostly represented by people who elect others from their own regions. So they're supposed to be representing their own regions and such. It's like the ideas of people are supposed to be represented by this branch. But let me also remind you that the president in our country also has absolute legislative power, and his legislative power is higher than that of the entire legislative branch. So if he doesn't agree with any of the things that our legislation proposes, then he can make his own decree, and this decree is going to have higher jurisdictive power than, legislative power than everything that the legislative branch can do.
Hmm.
And finally, the judicial branch. It's represented by the Constitutional Court and some general courts. The Constitutional Court enforces the Constitution, and it has 12 judges. To make a decision in favor or against, well, at least 6 people need to vote for a certain decision. And 6 of the people out of the 12 judges are appointed directly by the president. So if the president is essentially also in charge of the constitution, because he can place his own people in the constitutional court, and you can't prove that any of the violations of the constitution have occurred, because the court, half of the court is his own representatives, and he's the main person enforcing the constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Then as for general courts, then there is the higher court, which is the biggest and most important instance out of all of those. And pretty much all of its judges are chosen by the president as well. So you can kind of see at this point how pretty much every branch of power is controlled by the president.
Mm-hmm.
He's in charge of the executive branch, like directly in charge of them. He chooses all of them, all of the people that represent this branch of power. He has legislative rights, like absolute highest legislative rights in our country, and and both the constitutional court and the higher court also represent his interests, as he can choose half of the constitutional court, and he can choose pretty much any person in the higher court as well. So, and on top of this, lots of other things are also controlled by the president. KGB is, well, it's not supposed to be directly in charge of the president, but in charge of the KGB right now is one of his sons, Viktor Lukashenko. Then, yeah. Then the Bureau of Forensic Investigations answers directly to him. So literally any forensic investigation, like the highest instance of forensics, is also answers directly under the president. And also the military, because he is the head general of the army. Well, not exactly the president. I mean, not constitutionally, not the president himself by the constitution, but the person in charge that we have right now, Alexander Lukashenko. He is the absolute head of the army as well. It's actually difficult to say what the president in our country can't legally do. It's pretty insane. There was even
even if he is not allowed to do it, he could just basically just whisper into whatever director's ear and just be like, "Hey, just go ahead and do this," and then basically
pretty much
do it. Yeah.
Pretty much. I mean, there was an anecdotal situation a few maybe months ago, or maybe a year. I don't know if it was some time ago, not too long ago. uh, where he was even wondering that he couldn't do something by the constitution. Like he visited some random remote place, and people were unhappy with their local representatives, and he just directly said to them that we need to conduct new local elections like right now, in order to choose the new representatives, and he would make like a law. I mean, not a law, but he would publish a paper tomorrow under his signature. And it turned out that constitutionally he could not start elections into local representatives. And he was like, "Wait, I can't do that? Is that a thing?"
Yeah. What area was that in? Do you have like an oblast, or yeah, like what area was that in?
Oh, I have absolutely no idea, honestly. It
Okay.
it was it was some remote place. I really don't remember. It's just the fact that I remembered. I haven't made any notes on
Yeah.
where
Oh,
it
no, no,
was,
that's fine.
sadly.
But you're pretty positive that it did, or you're positive that it did happen though.
I'm positive. I mean, it's
Okay.
in the
Yeah.
public eye. It's in the public eye. Uh,
Hmm.
so, so you can kind of see how the situation is in our country is in terms of the power spread. And
Yeah,
I've already mentioned,
he took over everything
yeah,
in
the president.
relatively a short time.
Yep, it's absolutely insane, to be honest.
Yeah.
And remember the statement made by Zakharenko that I've mentioned previously, that he wanted absolute execution of his orders. Like he didn't really want any discussions to be there. If you could obey orders, then you would be elected, and he could now elect people into every branch of power, into every major political position, essentially.
Hmm.
So it's the person who essentially can give themselves absolute power in our country.
Yeah. Jesus. So let's fast forward a little bit to, kind of right before the elections, moving on to the election. So, was there much of a buildup when it came to the election? It seemed like the enthusiasm was really high to get him out of office. Am I correct on that?
Yep. Um, I had a slightly different talk in mind, but I don't know if you're
Oh, no, no,
constrained,
no.
then
You could go ahead. Yeah. What do you want to bring up next?
yeah, because I've made a small like list of points
Oh yeah,
that I
yeah,
wanted
you
to
could keep
address.
going then. Yeah,
It's just
whatever works for you. I'm
yeah.
the one learning, so I'll just shut up and you could keep going.
Okay. Just yeah, you can talk. You can give me like small breaks for my voice to rest and for me to sip a little bit on the leftovers of my tea as well.
Yeah.
You can.
um.
I'm more than
s-
welcome that. But
Oh yeah, definitely. So I'm just kind of trying to think.
yeah, yeah.
I'm
No
literally
need.
I'm just taking everything that you're saying, and
Yeah.
it's so
It
crazy
might be.
because
It's crazy.
not a lot of people really know about Belarus. I mean, just I'm kind of just talking from where I'm at right now. If I went up to just
Hmm.
some random stranger and start talking about Belarus, or if I even mentioned Minsk, they would have no
Hmm.
idea and stuff. And so it's kind of weird that th- the people who are publishing journals and blogs and things like that, it's definitely not in the mainstream, and I feel like it definitely isn't talked about. And I know you were mentioning that there were catastrophes that kind of clouded over the elections, and there's
Hmm.
probably a lot of bigger things that clouded over just some of the corruption that was going on over there. So it's kind of they must have a really good team to block a lot of this information off, or try to cover for his somewhat tyrannical power move that he's doing and stuff.
Yeah,
um
that's absolutely true. In my opinion, one of the reasons this campaign sparked so well and so quickly is that there was a lot of censorship back then, but now I mean there's still a lot of censorship back then, but it's from official government resources and not from not from independent media. There's become a lot more, and a lot of the media has become independent from the government, and
Hmm.
so we're seeing a lot of censorship being lifted
Yeah.
from
Do you
this
do
thing.
you feel like if you were, let's just say, semi-famous and you had like a video podcast, this was definitely more well established. I believe like it's going to reach out there, but probably not to the magnitude of, if a celebrity from Minsk, for example, was sitting down
Mhm.
and talking to me. If this came back to the government, do you feel like there would be people going after this person, this hypothetical person?
Uh, I don't know, honestly.
Mm,
This situation, nobody really knows where this situation is going to end up, but everybody understands that the wheel is starting to turn. Like,
mm-hmm,
there isn't going to be the same kind of oppression anymore. At least it doesn't look in the same manner. In 2018, a lot of protests in Armenia occurred, and those people were able to suppress the government in a relatively peaceful manner. Like,
mm-hmm,
it's kind of what the situation is looking like right now. Once we reach the critical mass, there is like no turning back. There's way too much exposure to the outside world,
mm-hmm.
and even uh, like I'm just gonna talk about we're gonna talk about the riots a little bit later on. I still want to make some build up as to how things occurred before these elections, is because once you understand what has been happening before these elections, then these elections are going to be so much easier to understand. It's
Mm-hmm.
just
Well, yeah, you've developed a really good foundation so far. So yeah, just yeah, keep going with it. I honestly I'm quiet because I'm just like, whoa, what the heck? You're turning closer into, North Korea at this point. Like, I mean, you're like creeping towards that direction. It's it's crazy. So
yeah.
yeah,
uh,
so please keep going. I'm captivated by all this.
so the next up, well, we've already talked about the president, his absolute power. So I think the next major factor about the unhappiness of Belarus and Belarusians, the folk, is actually the president himself. He was a really good representative of the nation back in 1994 because he seemed to be a person who went from simple farmers and from simple agriculture to actually being a representative of the people in the higher ups and in at the highest at the highest position in the government. So everybody felt really comfortable with him there. But uh, the president's personality has been showing quite a lot uh, for all that time, like his true colors. And there's a popular term in psychiatry. It's not like an official diagnosis or anything, but it's a popular term called the dark triad.
Hmm.
And it's a combination of psychiatric disorders that you often see in a combination. It's three major disorders: narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. Uh, Narcissism is mainly characterized by grandiosity and grandiose ideas. There are some other criteria, but the presence of grandiosity is pretty much, well, it's pretty much the most characteristic trait out of all of them. So it's like dreams of unlimited absolute power, of unlimited success, of perfect love, and also such stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, given how we've already talked about the power, you can kind of see where I'm going with this point. I
Yeah.
mean, we have a president who is the leader of the country, which is a grandiose idea of its own. The president has an absolute power over everything. So he's like the representative of the people. He's supposed to be loved by people, chosen by people. He has absolute power to do whatever is necessary, and he's like backed up and loved.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, I've previously mentioned 80% of the votes, as an example. And I believe that this is also coming from excessive need for admiration. Like grandiosity and excessive need for admiration are very characteristic of narcissists. Back in the day, he did legitimately get 80% of the votes, and in all of his previous elections, I mean, in all of his elections after 1994, which are previous elections by now, he kept also getting at least 75 to 80% of the votes, which is, well, a similar number. So you know how people with advanced psychological disorders, especially criminals and such, they like also keep trophies of their own killings. Like many have their own like journals with news articles about them, and it's also they also represent it as people who stick to the familiar. Like they have literally rituals, like the Red Dragon from which is, well, a story from the Hannibal books. And even Dexter, which was a really popular series back in the
Yeah, I've
day.
seen all of
It's
it.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, they're like, though both of the killers, they have a ritual literally that they're trying to perfect, and they only stick to it. And I feel like this 80% of the votes is kind of like his ritual as well. It's like something familiar that he tries to stick to. Like he really enjoyed being supported by 80% of the country, like legitimately, with the people chanting for them, staying behind them, the people organizing riots behind them. And I just believe that he's falsifying elections with those 80% to like relieve those days of glory, you know?
Interesting. Yeah, the 80. He likes that number.
Yeah, even like even right now, it's absolutely obvious to the public eye that there's no way in hell he could have 80% of the votes. And the official results came in just yesterday, and it's like 80.1% of the votes for him, which is absolutely, it's like, in my opinion, there is no way that this is a legitimate number.
Yeah.
And it's funny because he actually publicly admitted also that one of the elections was falsified, but in he said that the results were lowered. In fact, he said, like, the quote goes something like the quote goes something like this. It's like uh, people pressured me into conducting more European elections. You know, like maybe like the USA, where Trump and Clinton, there was a really small difference between their votes. It was like
Yeah.
50-ish, 49-ish, or something like this.
Yeah. It was close.
It was really close. And then he was like, people want European elections where there isn't such a vast difference between all the candidates. And he said that, like, we made the European elections because I actually had 93% of the votes, but we made it 80 to look more European. And the Europeans didn't recognize those elections anyways. Uh, and again, I'm not spreading false rumors. This quote is on the internet. A lot of his quotes are on the internet. I mean, I don't need to spread any lies and rumors, because all of those things, you can find them by yourself,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
So the second trait that I want to address is psychopathy, which is mainly characterized by lack of empathy towards others and engagement in criminal behavior. Lack of empathy is a topic that we're probably going to be talking about a little bit more. Well, it's
Well,
going
with the
to become a little
protests,
bit more clear.
especially.
Yeah, as the protests, especially, it's going to become more clear as we talk more about it. So I'm not going to stop on it. But there is also engagement in risky behavior and like impulsive behavior, like doing something without thinking about it. And this is essentially represented by his killings and by his revolutions. He was the leader of the opposition back in the day. He was fighting for his place under the sun. Like, he was incredibly impulsive. He was trying to be the political leader, organize movements, organize the opposition. I previously also mentioned that he also got beaten up in his own riots. Like, he knows exactly what the people have to suffer through right now, because he has gone through it himself. He has done those movements against the reigning government as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Machiavellianism, the third trait, is well, it's essentially methodical manipulation. Like, it also comes from lack of empathy, and those people, they are not interested in literally anything but being able in control and being able to manipulate whoever they want. So
Yes.
this can be very easily seen in the quote by Zakharenko that if you obey orders, you're going to be put in charge. Like, he doesn't want any questions for him. He just wants to be in control. He wants to be manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's also his constitutional changes, like being able to put anyone in charge of literally anything within the country. Um, he has created ripe soil for himself to manipulate pretty much anybody that he wants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm still
Anyways,
captivated by
well,
the 80. I'm
when
still
it comes
captivated by
to
the 80. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, sure. Say
Oh,
your thing.
I'm just still captivated by the 80%. That kind of blows my mind a little bit. That's his mark. He probably has a tattoo of it on him.
I don't think I don't believe he has a tattoo, but
Yeah,
maybe
that's his
maybe
lucky
like
number.
yeah, an invisible one on his forehead, maybe.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah. But keep going. Sorry.
so anyways, there's a lot of opinions regarding his fabricated personality, actually. I mean, he may be impulsive. He is quite impulsive, but he is also really cunning. He is an incredibly good um, manipulator in terms of the things that he says and how he says them.
Mm.
So many people actually believe that he's fabricating his personality to a certain extent. Back in 1994, it made a lot of sense because he wanted to seem like the common folk. His way of becoming a prominent political leader was to, I mean, not a prominent political leader, but the president, in fact. His way of doing that was to seem as close to the people as necessary, and it comes from, well, the fabricated personality comes in a few different ways, in my opinion. Uh, First and foremost, being this idea of the representative of the people, is that he's sticking quite a lot to this idea, to a point where, in my opinion, well, at least that's my opinion, that's not something I personally have evidence of, and this is not something that has surfaced about him, but I also believe that his entire way of talking may be fabricated. Like, he has a if you listen to him, he has this sort of very distinct and specific way of speaking. If you speak Russian, then it's incredibly clear to you what is wrong. In our country, there are two main languages, which is Belarusian and Russian. And as it often happens when there's more than one language, people start using uh, one and the other. They essentially amalgamate, right? They amalgamate to a certain degree. And Russian, that is similar to Belarus, like a mix of Belarusian and Russian, is known largely as Trostyanka. So he has this kind of, he doesn't exactly speak Trostyanka, he speaks mostly Russian, but he has this kind of specific accent and way of speaking about it, which is his way of speaking is a lot like Belarusian agricultural common folk type. So like in English and like US terms, it would be like speaking hillbilly, they have this certain way of talking, like, "Oh, you ain't got nothing, yo," and
Yeah, I see.
and, and in
So
a way, if you
he's trying to, he basically kind of manipulated his voice or the language and how to speak to basically appeal to all.
in my opinion, yes,
Okay.
there's definitely some uh, there's definitely some fabrication of his public personality, that's for sure.
Mm.
And knowing the things that I've previously mentioned, well, his impulsivity, his grandiosity, his desire to manipulate people, there's definitely a lot of fabrication going on when he's in the public eye, because uh, he doesn't present himself this way to the public, but a lot of his personality has been slipping essentially.
Mm. Okay.
Russia,
Because he has more control now, so he doesn't care as much.
yeah, he doesn't care as much, nearly as
Mm.
much, my opinion.
Yeah.
And also the impulsivity, it kind of prevents him from being smart about covering his personality all the time, you know. Uh, so what
You were
else?
saying something about Russia?
Yeah, true. So Russia actually perceives him as a clowny political leader. Uh, like not just Russia, but well, anybody who contacts Belarus in more or less frequent fashion, who hears them, who understands Russian, they perceive him as sort of clowny because he says a lot of incoherent things. There are outrageous amounts of stupid quotes on the internet about him, like "I am an orthodox atheist," or "It's better to be a dictator than to be gay," and so on. These are some of the favorite ones. Like I'm not exaggerating. These are legitimate his quotes, and there are a lot of
Mhm.
them. There are a lot of made up facts on his behalf. Like he's supposed to be a historian by his education, and uh, and he's been throwing out some historical facts that are 100% inaccurate as well.
You see,
So,
the more you're talking, the more he's sounding like the leader of North Korea. Kim Jong Un like did 18 holes of golf in 17 shots. Like, you know, it's just ridiculous things. Like, yeah,
it that last statement sounds like those old Chuck Norris memes.
yeah,
Like,
exactly. Yeah. You notice when you know you have full government control, you start kind of putting out that propaganda for these kind of dumb baseless facts of things that are, you know, clearly not true. You just, I don't know if you're trying to make the people just love you more so you have more um morale in the country. You know, it's a really strange thing. I think they're just bored, and so they want to make up just funny facts to be loved more.
I don't know about this. There isn't a lot of. I mean, could you? I zoned out for like half a second because I was trying to drink some tea. But
Oh
can
no,
you
no,
make this point again? Because I didn't really understand it. Like, you mean that the protesters are bored, or?
no. I'm saying that a leader, you know, making up these facts, just, I think, you know, he has all this power now, and I think he just wants to keep feeling loved, so he'll kind of spew out just some, you know, baseless facts, or, you know, or just random BS to be loved
I
more. I noticed that when the government or when the leader gets more powerful, the wackier they kind of become. Even the leader of the Philippines, you know, North Korea, and some of these other leaders that are that have a lot of power in their government, they start kind of going crazy and saying a lot of weird, crazy things.
I am not sure about this. I believe in terms of our president, in terms of Lukashenko,
Hmm.
I think it's his impulsivity more than anything.
Mm.
I believe it's more impulsivity, and that he may legitimately believe everything that he says or not recognize some of the things that he says. I don't. Well, on the other side, I also think that some of the wackiness associated with him is deliberate, because to an outside observer, he may seem like a little bit of a clowny Belarusian, agricultural, folkish, rude
Hmm.
person. But realistically, when people start debating him, when they start to engage in arguments with him, he's really good at suppressing his opponent's opinions. He's very ruthless. He becomes very manipulative with facts, with the points that he makes. Is that people are legitimately surprised that he can manipulate the debate, that he can conduct himself so well when it comes to proving his points.
It's yeah, so that kind of sounds more like the art of war. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
you look weak when you're strong.
yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
At
yeah,
least in my
that's what it
opinion.
sounds like more.
Yeah. So yeah, he's perceived as clowny by Russians, but he's actually a pretty ruthless political leader when it comes to this.
Hmm.
At least he used to be perceived this way when it comes to debating. But right now, a lot of the people are growing increasingly disconnected from him, because his amplitude, it used to be good back in the 90s, because he seemed like an he seemed like an agricultural leader, and agricultural leaders were respected back then. They were one of the few people who had higher education back then, and a lot of the country was indeed agricultural, so he seemed like a representative from the people. But right now, he just seems like he has grown increasingly disconnected from his audience, is
Hmm.
what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
That people no longer perceive him as ruthless and trustworthy. They perceive him as rude, arrogant, and manipulative.
Hmm.
So the general perception has changed, because a lot more people have started getting higher education. They have started seeing a lot of things, and right now, especially, people have started seeing a lot of the bad things that he is doing, and that he has done over the years.
Well, yeah, and we also have more excuse me, we have more access to the computer with our phones and just our
Yeah,
laptops and stuff, so we can actually dive into the actual history of them and see old clips and videos. So the
yeah,
information is, you know, just going crazy now. And I believe even some of these political leaders are saying like, "Shit, like I can't." It's almost impossible to suppress now, which I believe is a good
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that also appeal to his fabricated personality, in my opinion, is all the media coverage of it, because ever since he became the president, there's also been heavy censorship of the news.
Hmm.
Essentially, every news channel that is situated in our country undergoes government regulation. They make sure that nothing that contradicts or puts the president in the bad light is going on live. So all the content in them is government controlled. All the TV is government controlled, and even when certain protests occurred, there wasn't as much information about them to go around. All the bad things that were happening, um, none of those things really saw the massive light of day at that
Hmm.
point. And I think that one of the reasons that such violent regimes, or inhumane regimes as North Korea and China, one of the reasons I think they still kind of prosper. China is kind of on the brink of making some changes in Hong Kong, but uh, even their riots weren't as successful, even though they were by far the most advanced, in my opinion, in the
Hmm.
world. So the reason for that is because those countries censor literally everything. Like in our country, the internet was allowed to prosper just like that, and everybody started using it. But in other countries, in North Korea, and in China, there's very heavy censorship of the internet.
Yeah.
So people are more disconnected from the outside world, and they're also more disconnected from what is actually happening inside of the country.
Yeah, I actually had a conversation on my last episode about that, and the unfortunate thing is I wasn't able to talk, or my guest wasn't able to speak too much on it because of fears of getting fired and deported back to the USA. So it's yeah, it's so weird. It's so interesting. It's just yeah, it, I see some reasoning behind it, but I think for the greater good, the more information, the better. I think we just kind of need to bring more light to everything, to
It's
every
true.
country. Yeah,
It's true.
and I and
Absolutely.
I and a lot of people um and people, I feel like most people in the US know this and stuff, but I mean you could say anything, almost anything, obviously, besides saying, you're gonna kill someone or the president, or some, just anybody. But
I
you
mean,
could pretty
yeah.
much say and do almost anything you want in our country and have no repercussions. Of course, people are going to comment and say, "Oh, you're an idiot," and things like that. And there might be like, you could maybe put yourself in a little danger if you get on the fringes and stuff. But it, I've never been to, um, yeah, I think when I went to Hong Kong for the first time in 2015, or no, 2017, yeah, I was trying to go on basic sites and they weren't allowed. And I was just like, what the hell is going on? And I start learning really quickly
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. You need VPNs in there.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, everybody's like, "Oh, you don't have a VPN." I'm like, well, what is that? Why do I need that? And they're like, "Oh yeah, it's not allowed in this country and stuff." So after college and traveling and stuff, I just start learning about the world really quickly. And I was just like, Jesus, like, I thought I had my issues here, man. There's if there was anything like that over in the US, everybody would be freaking out and going crazy. They'd be going psycho.
Yeah.
And and
Yeah.
and if President Trump one day is like, I'm going to get elected for, there's no more terms, I'm just going to keep getting elected, people would freak the fuck out. But I mean, and rightfully so. And
Yeah. It's
I,
true.
I think it is kind of weird how some people are just compliant with it. Like a country is compliant. I don't know if it's by force, if it's the suppression of information, the indoctrination of them growing up. There's a lot of factors that kind of come into play to
Yeah. It's
kind of,
it's all of those things. That's true.
yeah. And I'm assuming that you're starting to notice it creeping up in your country, especially now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. You know,
Uh,
yeah,
Oh,
continue your point.
before I ask, when we go basically into the election and riots in post-election, um, do you notice? It's going to be kind of a few questions and stuff. We don't have to
Uh-huh.
go too into it, but is there a big, um, basically, are there a lot of people that are really happy with how the government is right now? Is there also an opposing force to the protests as well? Are there a lot of pro Belarusian uh, citizens that are for what's going on right now?
Uh, First, well, there are supporters of the current regime,
Yeah.
and it's definitely true. There is a meme going on around the country that Lukashenko is supported by 3% of the people. Um, but realistically, I think it's a higher number of people. I would say realistically, about 20-ish% of the people would actually support him. And as far as the riots go, oh yeah, one of the things I also wanted to mention in about the media as well. Uh, coming back to that argument, is that a lot of those protests are shown as pro-Belarusian on the TV, like pro-Lukashenko.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, they're showing on TV. They're showing some footage of riot police being beaten up, or like they're saying that like 50 of the people of the riot police were injured in the process of those riots, and then they would show people standing on the streets and showing flowers with like no context. So like those people are standing on the street as the protest of the current regime, but they're showing it as like the footage of people memorializing riot police who are suffering right now.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of manipulation about this information going on, and the people who don't use independent sources, they are the most likely to be indoctrinated into believing the current regime.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Going to the indoctrination, which is kind of the second part of my question.
uh,
Besides media, which obviously you made obvious, is there an early indoctrination with kids and education and universities?
yes, it's true. This is the point that I was about to jump to as well.
Oh,
Thanks
okay.
for uh, I mean, you put me on the right track because I was losing my thoughts. So
Yeah.
good, really good. Anyways, there is a lot of ideological work. In fact, like every major company has an ideological leader, and we study ideology of the Belarusian government. We study its structure in school, in universities again. It's not presented as like the ideal and perfect, but it's just presented the way that it is. Like,
Mm-hmm.
here's how the government is organized. The president is in charge. He's the political leader, the representative of the constitution and the freedom of the people, etc., etc., etc. So we're not like being directly indoctrinated into it, but we are being presented. We're being presented with everything that's written on the like presidential website and stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, on the presidential website, it's written in terms that the president protects the country and such. So we are being, told it in the same exact manner. But as far as indoctrination goes, there are a lot more things you need to take care of. Like, indoctrination implies that you need to suppress any other negative thought other than the information that you're feeding. And there's no real suppression of it. So,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to, well, religion is an incredibly popular topic when it comes to indoctrination. And if you look at it, it's really manipulative, in fact, because small children, they are told that God is there, God loves you. But on the other hand, if you don't love God, if you don't support Him, if you don't pray to Him, if you don't read the Bible or go to church, then you're going to hell. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's an ultimatum at the end of it, saying that if you don't do this, then it's going to be bad. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things are punished as well. Like, there's even thought crime in a lot of religions. Like, if you just think of doing something bad, then it's the same as doing that exact thing. And and in our country, it's nowhere near that. Like, we're not being indoctrinated to a full extent. Like, if you just live by yourself but don't support the government, then you're free to live by yourself so long as the government reigns. But if you're actually organizing protests and such, then you're going to get detained, jailed, beaten up. If you spread false rumors, then you're likely to get things done. So, like, our independence of thought is not being suppressed, but our actions are being severely punished for it. And you can see that in the riots. Like, the movements for the opposition have existed for a very long time, but they have taken very small action up until now. When they were taking action, they were beaten up, they were jailed, they were repressed, and so on and so forth. but those movements have always existed in a way.
Interesting.
So, the last thing that I want to address regarding the personality, and we're gonna finish with this block of information and start getting closer to like what the problems with elections have always been,
Yeah.
is actually where all those problems come from. Well, we can't really know for sure when things went dark for a person. I mean, his past is in the public eye, and a lot of it is being covered, obviously. But he had no real father when growing up, so no father figure in the family, and nobody even really knew his father. It's just said that he bailed when Lukashenko was born. So I feel like one of those problems comes from the family. It's like even the mother herself, she didn't really know the father. Well, she didn't know who it was, which is a warning sign, to say the least. Um, so his father was never legitimately known, and I don't believe that this is a healthy environment for anybody to grow up in. A lot of those psychiatric issues come from a person's childhood, and it's developmental more than anything, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Also, the diagnosis for psychopathy isn't taken out of nowhere. He was actually legitimately diagnosed with moderate psychopathy once, and it's also one of the reasons that he was excluded from the army. Like, he worked in military for a while, but when news got out that he had a psychiatric diagnosis, he was swiftly discarded from there. So let me get like there are some rumors about how he actually got this diagnosis, but it's been confirmed that he did do it. So the story goes in a few different ways, where he wanted to be the head of an agricultural company. It was a very prestigious job back then. So he impulsively went in and demanded to be a leader of the agricultural company. Uh, and the story differs in one way or the other. One story says that he was just super forceful about it, and he was detained and then taken to a psychiatric hospital. The other one says that he essentially didn't have higher education back then, so he went and got a paper from somewhere that he did receive higher education. People started doubting that, so they wanted to check him out, and he was arrested and put into a psychiatric clinic. But either way, he was, for a period of time, he was admitted to a psychiatric clinic in Mogilov, which is his country of origin. I mean, not country, but his city
His
of
city,
origin,
yeah.
or like, well,
Where he was
not maybe
raised
not.
and born.
Yeah, yeah. So he was admitted to that clinic, and the diagnosis itself is longer and more complicated, and psychiatry has changed a lot, so nobody really, I mean, only psychiatrists realistically know what their diagnoses mean, in broad terms. But at the start of the diagnosis was moderate psychopathy. So it's not, and there were some other mentions about a few other things. Uh, so it's not just my opinion regarding his personality, but it's actually a confirmed thing that existed to a certain point. Uh, people uh, People from the clinic say that he was indeed admitted there, and some of the people who worked there, they still remember those days. It's how the information actually got out. The doctor who actually diagnosed him, he fled the country in fear of political pursuits, but the records have been actually destroyed when he became the president.
Of course.
The records were destroyed in 1994. dictator. That at least, well, that's the official term, because no mentions of him ever being there currently exist outside of people who talk about it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's kind of what it seems to happen when, especially, I mean, in a sense, there is a degree of privacy, but it seems like you know, when you gain power and you want to hide a
Mhm.
lot of embarrassing things and stuff, you will go to that extent of destroying it and maybe even threatening the lives of the people who have diagnosed you and
Mhm.
who basically
Yeah,
have just dirt, political, or who have dirt on you that could be used against you.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's it's been it's well not been it's a common theme among many political leaders to destroy evidence. I mean, in the U.S., it's kind of a similar situation with Clinton's. You know, there are sides and stuff where people just mysteriously disappeared or committed suicides with two bullet wounds to their head,
Yeah.
to the back of their head, mind that.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
it's a pretty it's a common joke around here, getting suicided by the Clintons.
yeah. Yeah, sadly, this is a realistic situation in
Yeah.
every country.
So,
Uh,
just to kind of basically talk about, it looks like, you know, we have basically an hour block left. So, I
oh man,
you have so much to
I
say,
I
and
have so much to say more.
I know, and you know, we're probably going to have to do a second episode, even though we still have an hour and stuff. But we'll probably keep the COVID stuff to another day, and
Oh, okay, yeah.
and we could just basically just continue on with the election and
I mean,
moving
I
to the
could
post-election.
everything. Most of the things from this point on are actually gonna be straightforward. So I don't know about
Oh,
a second episode. So
okay.
we could
Yeah,
like, I
if we
mean,
have time, yeah.
if it's convenient for you, then we could talk for like a little bit more than that. You know.
Well, yeah, we have, yeah, we have pretty much like an hour 15. So yeah, let's just dive into it. So
Okay, sure.
what what
So
happened
well,
with or yeah, let's build up
the
to it. What
yeah, one like I have one more point in terms of building up to the elections.
Oh, okay.
So the people are unhappy with how the power is spread. You know that he is. Well, we've already talked about the first point, which is people are unhappy with how the power is spread. That the president has absolute power. Then the people are also quite becoming increasingly unhappy with the president himself, like his personality, the way he behaves, and such. So let's mention one final point about the people's unhappiness. That the current political situation in our country. So again, why we have been pretty poor compared to other countries. So the main political cause for our country by the president has always been to sort of change nothing, or change as little as possible. I mean, the president often says this word "созидательная" policy, and nobody really knows what the full meaning of this word is, realistically. It's like, uh, my understanding of it is that it means pretty much sit in place, do your own thing, and continue on with very little changes.
Obey,
Uh,
it sounds like. That's why I feel like the
yeah,
translation is, yeah.
yeah, even obey a little bit, true,
Yeah.
but still, I mean, we as a country we have been a lot less progressive than everybody else. Like, you know, the president himself, he doesn't like acknowledge LGBT and stuff. Uh, he doesn't like he doesn't like really any changes to how our people are, to how our situation in the country is. And we're actually one of the few countries who still has death sentence in their constitution. Like
Oh, wow.
we can legally execute the death sentence, and it's actually being enforced a little bit
Hmm.
still. So The current situation is that we change very little. There is total control by the president. All of the main people in charge of everything, they're also in charge of, I mean, they execute his commands, they do whatever he wants. Then the policy has been to completely destroy and suppress the opposition. We've already talked about Zakharenko and Goncharov, who mysteriously disappeared when they became the leaders of the opposition for a while. And all of the opposition has been severely suppressed ever since. So we are also not a very we're not a very rich country. We've been rich in the agriculture, and it's not a very profitable field,
Mm-hmm.
and it's becoming even less profitable for a lot of countries, because our main source of export is actually Russia. So we're producing goods for mainly Russia. EU produces its own goods, and it doesn't really need ours, even though our goods are actually really, really nice. Like uh, the milk, the eggs, the all of that stuff that comes from agriculture, and like chocolate and all of those things, they're actually
Mm-hmm.
really, really good in our country. Like you'd be surprised, but uh, but it's true. And the the idea of the president, ever since he has been elected, was to come in contact with Russia, like was to receive help from Russia until the crisis could be averted. And uh, ever since, he has always been balancing out between Russia and Europe. Uh, like Russia has been the main helper still. They've been given credits, they've been given oil, they've been giving gas, and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the EU is our like source of independence from Russia in a way, because EU also sanctions Russia for the political changes that they make, and uh, if we support the EU in terms of sanctions, like we can be, I mean, the president, not exactly we, I address the country, but it's realistically the president. He can say that he can say that he supports the EU in certain things to make sure that he is deliberately also moving away from Russia. And
Mm-hmm.
the idea is to keep the balance in between, like play both sides in a way,
Hmm.
because this way he can cover up some of the bad things that he's doing, and it's also another major issue, which is possible integration with Russia.
Hmm.
Rumor has it that one of the reasons Russia was so willing to give so much to our country is because there were promises of eventual integration. Uh, sim- uh, there were promises of having the same currency, of having the same constitution, of having the same trade borders, of having like no borders with them, and a lot of those actually came to fruition. We have open borders with Russia. All you need to do to travel from Belarus to Russia is actually just show your face and show a passport, and that's it. You
Mm-hmm.
don't need any other documents and stuff. You can just freely move here and there. Then we have the same trading space with Russia and Kazakhstan, uh, which means that our products are sold to each other at a huge discount. Uh, and eventually, there were supposed to be higher measures for integration. Like Russia has been pressuring Belarus to do a lot more things, because Lukashenko was pretty cunning about it. He kept getting support from Russia, but he kept postponing all of the integration process.
Hmm.
Uh, in the end, Russia started making demands and exerting its pressure. Like, we're going to stop selling you gas unless you do something. We're going to stop doing this, and this unless you do something. And a lot of properties have, in fact, been sold to Russia. Like the largest gas pipe that's going through our country and into Europe has been sold to Russia. Essentially the entire gas industry has been sold to Russia right now. Russia is also building a power plant or like a nuclear plant, even not a power plant, just a nuclear plant. Even it's supposed. It was supposed to start its work with like right now in August, but it's getting delayed even more. So even more, and probably will get delayed even more due to the political situation.
Yeah.
And this integration has been postponing. So Russia has been exerting a lot more pressure. They've been buying properties and so on and so forth. So I believe he also, well, it's not I believe, but I think it's been a brilliant move on his part to also not acknowledge the Crimea incident with Russia and Ukraine.
Like
When
acknowledge it, like for it or against it?
acknowledge for it, so he was against it. No,
Okay.
he was against it. So EU started sanctioning Russia for that entire situation, and he also sided with the EU on this one. So it's like he is perceived in a better light. And also, if Russia can forcefully take a part of Ukraine for themselves, then the same exact thing can happen to Belarus.
Do you
So
think Russia is trying to get their hands on Belarus?
I am not sure. Let me put it like this. Russia has been known for conducting major information wars more than anything. A lot of there's been a popular video that's been recommended by YouTube a lot lately about a former Russian KGB leader who talks about subversion tactics, like how to manipulate and disintegrate the society, how to essentially suppress any kind of regime, and how to culturally destroy a country. So Russia is very cunning. Like it's not going to go into a direct conflict. It's a lot smarter about its means of manipulation. And
Yeah.
in my opinion, there's been a lot of information manipulation in this campaign. Like most of the news, most of the news that are published, they come from sources outside of the country. Like the biggest source of information about Belarus right now is a Telegram channel called Nechta. And the leaders of, I mean, the organizers of it are situated in Poland. But I don't believe that they're affiliated somehow with Russia or Poland, but they are definitely filtering information through, like in a way that is convenient for them, that is convenient for the protesters.
Interesting.
Then not all of the information is being manipulated. Like most of the things that are posted there, I believe them to be true, like at least 80 to 90% of them, because it's still a platform that is organized by the people. So most of the news are taken from, they are submitted by the people. So all the pictures, they are taken by the people from those riots. They are taken from independent press. And they just filter the information, which is pretty much convenient. And actually anybody can influence that information, but not the government. Like they are not going to post any pro Lukashenko stuff, obviously. Even on there are very few videos of people hitting riot police and stuff. We know that there are also dumb people who are hitting the police, the riot police as well. It's not an aggression from just one side, but it's from the other as well. But there's very little footage of that actually happening, and it's also shown in a positive light, like violence, but in a positive manner, which is still not a good way of showing off violence. So as far as other countries go, there's also China, which we have become increasingly like friendly with over the last decade. China has also been allowed to construct its small Chinatowns outside of the city and even in the cities. And they've been actually financing the building of a large stadium in Minsk too.
Hmm.
So relations with China are growing, and China is allowed to do a lot of things in our country right now,
Interesting.
which is in my opinion also a brilliant political move. And here is why. Uh, of the few people who actually acknowledged our elections for this year, uh, there were, I believe, Kazakhstan, uh, Putin, who is the president of Russia, and actually Xi Jinping. I'm not sure how you pronounce it correctly, but
Yeah,
I
Xi
think that's how
Jinping.
you.
Yeah.
Xi Jinping, yeah. He also acknowledged the elections of Belarus and congratulated Lukashenko.
Hmm.
And when it came to Russia, he also warned Russia not to take any intervention because he's very interested in what Belarus is offering him right now. Essentially, it's a really brilliant political move because Russian intervention becomes a lot more dangerous for them because now there is pressure on Russia from China, which is one of the biggest countries in the world as well.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so this idea of trying to balance out between everybody uh, has worked really really well so far. At least it has avoided being integrated with Russia, at least up until this point. Now, in my opinion, the EU has made some sanctions previously over other elections, but they were also most of them have also been taken down. Right now, the wheel is turning, and US and Europe both said that they are going to sanction us pretty severely.
Hmm.
So, in my opinion, this kind of withdraws support for our country from the West, like almost to its full extent. We have always kind of been politically dependent on Russia. I mean, not politically, but economically dependent on Russia.
Hmm.
And right now, we have very weak economy, and we are going to be even more dependent on both Russia and China. So they are obviously interested in Lukashenko being the president because they're given free passes to do whatever they want, and the
Hmm.
West is out of the picture pretty much for Belarus at this point. So this
What do you think that's what do you think what country scares you the most when it comes to the intervention? Because they see it obviously as an opportunity to invest and kind of gain control. What country do you believe is like your biggest threat when it comes to the intervention?
um, probably Russia. They are not go. I mean, China has no real opportunity to attack us. It's just way too inconvenient for them, and
Hmm.
they are also on relatively, despite their regime, despite the having totalitarian regime, they're also on really good terms with the outside world.
Hmm.
There are very few. There are very few political limitations for them and economical ones. I mean, all of the world works for China essentially at this point. Even like the media industry works for China. Even the movies are made to appease China, you know.
Hmm.
In the Star Wars sequels, there are even some rumors about the new Star Wars trilogy where there's like a black character called Finn,
Yeah, yeah, and
and
he's not in it.
yeah, and he was downplayed because Russia wasn't happy with black representatives and their movies taking major roles.
Yeah.
You can even see the posters where his image like is much smaller and out of the and like closer to the edge of the pictures
Yeah,
always
yeah,
for
yeah.
Chinese posters.
Oh
So
yeah.
everybody works for China in a way, uh, but if China starts an intervention, then they are going to be put in a really, really bad light for their attempts.
Mm.
Russia, on the other hand, I mean, they're already sanctioned by the EU. They are on relatively okay terms with the US, I would say,
Hmm.
right now, especially since Trump is quite okay with Putin. So if Biden is to be elected this year, then who knows how that is gonna go. But right now they're on okay terms.
Hmm.
And
Would
what
you
was I
would you
mean?
rather
So
have
if
a would you rather have a president that's friendlier with um, Russia or that's more opposed to Russia? I guess what I'm asking is, would you prefer someone more like Trump or someone more like Biden?
Oh, I'm not savvy in terms of the presidential campaign this year. As far as I'm concerned, you are picking the least horrible of the two options, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I would say that uh, we, well, I'm going to touch on the economical situation like right next. But in my opinion, we right now we are dependent heavily on other countries for support. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who is willing to provide that support. In my opinion, so if China is willing to support us, if Russia is willing to support us, if the EU is willing to support us, then by all means, we should be developing communications with all of them.
Hmm.
So I would welcome a more Western regime, however, where we return to the president's power being severely limited.
I see. Yeah. I guess that would be a better question if you yeah, if you wanted more of a Eastern or Western influence. I think that would
Yeah.
probably have been a better question. So that was more of the answer I guess I was
Yeah.
looking
So
for.
I would support both. To be fair, like
Mm,
both would be perfect, but I would say if we're moving anywhere, then we should move somewhere close to what the West does,
gotcha.
because Russia is learning from us, so it's moving
Hmm.
closer to it's moving constitutionally closer to us than to anything else,
Mm,
and this is something that we are striving to get away from.
gotcha.
Well, anyway, so what I want to talk about briefly is the economy of our country. So I've already mentioned how in 1994 our economy suffered greatly, and that we basically had no real good relations after becoming independent out of from anyone. We couldn't support ourselves very well,
Hmm.
um, and I believe that the situation hasn't really changed a lot. Because if we are striving towards independence right now, then we're pretty much heading for the same situation that was back in 1994. We need to rely heavily on others to support us, for at least for now, until we build our own strong economy. Because, in my opinion, none of those measures taken by the president in that time, they haven't really addressed the economical issues. They've been simply borrowing from other countries, but never really making our own strong economy. And it's been supported by a lot of independent researchers on the internet.
Hmm.
Essentially, all of the businesses and well, most of the companies that work in our country, they are controlled by the government, and most of the small businesses that are willing to start in our country, they are also regulated by the government, severely regulated. You have to pay a lot of taxes. You have to adjust to a lot of conditions about starting your own small business in here.
Hmm.
Even 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 any kind of foreign support is still taxed. Like I talked to one girl who worked as an interpreter for some company making translations of volunteer organizations, and a lot of volunteer organizations are not really willing to support Belarus in terms of in terms of, in terms of conducting their stuff in here.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is because they need to take care of literally everything of the entire organization process. They need to buy venues, they need to transport people, they need to pay for accommodations and stuff. And even if they're willing to invest money into something like, for instance, educating people about some kind of problem, coming here, educating them about a problem, then they have to do it completely on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And they also have to pay taxes for the amount of money that they are willing to invest. So for instance, if they are willing to invest $1 million into like conducting some kind of charity organization in here, then they also have to pay taxes from that $1 million as well,
Hmm.
which is absolutely unheard of. Like they're trying to help the country somehow, and they're still being taxed for using their own money to do anything in this country.
Mm-hmm. How much tax do you guys pay? If you could guess.
Officially, it's like the income tax is about 12 or maybe like 14-ish% right now. I kind of the number slipped my mind. It was always like 12% in my mind, but
Mm-hmm.
it's but it may be higher right now. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, that's fine. I
But
just wanted kind of a rough estimate.
yeah, but a lot of people believe that our tax, to say the least, is being collected even before we receive our paychecks. Like, um, so like we should be receiving twice as much, but then we are also, but we're receiving much less and also paying tax on top of that from the income.
So
Like we always,
it looks like I just looked it up here really quick. It looks like you have a
yeah,
12% flat rate.
yeah, that's the official 12% flat on the income. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not wrong. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry,
Now
I
then,
just kind of got cut off. Where
yeah,
were we at?
sure. We were at the economic situation. So a lot of
Oh, yeah.
the main supporter for our country has in fact been Russia. They've been giving us very large credits. They've been giving us, again, free oil, almost relatively free oil, relatively free gas. And
Mhm.
there's been a major outrage amongst Russian politicians uh, when the prices of oil were discussed. Because oil has always been sold to our country at a very, very low rate.
Mhm.
And our country has been reselling that oil to Europe at a much higher rate. So we were acting like essentially an offshore that made a lot of money for ourselves. And Russia was like outraged about it, and they stopped importing oil at a certain point.
Oh, I mean, I would.
Then,
If I ran the
yeah,
country, I'd be like, this
yeah,
bullshit.
that's absolute bullshit. That's for real.
Yeah.
And what was I about to say? Yeah, and Russia also gave us credits to pay for gas, to pay for oil, and such and such. And the way of Lukashenko was to take another new credit to pay the interest on the previous credits. Like Russia kept investing more and more money into us and kept getting broken promises of things that would change. And in fact, our people have also been getting broken promises. So this economic situation means that the people are not very rich because we're mostly dependent on Russia and we have very little of our own economy. There are some industries that are profitable, but not by a whole lot, and the growth is very, very slow.
Hmm.
So the people have also been promised a lot of things during the presidential campaigns, such as high wages, like doctors, teachers need to receive more. It's all the standard stuff that is being said by pretty much every candidate in every country, literally.
Yeah.
Those promises have been broken. Like they are always broken. Let me put it like this: we are working in the medical field. Well, I work in the medical field, and we've been promised a 20% increase in wages starting from 2020. We haven't seen any of it. In fact, at the start of 2020, there were legitimate concerns that our wages would actually get lower because there was a new system. A new system was introduced of counting our wages. So everybody was concerned that our wages would actually be lower, and they were supposed to be lower, actually, according to the new wage calculations.
Interesting.
And it's August. It's been 9 months, and we haven't seen any increase in sales so far. No, none of that. Like 20% promised, none of it has come so far.
Now,
So
kind of jumping in, how has your wages been affected with the COVID? Has there been much wages affected? I know you guys are open and stuff, but generally speaking, for the country, has there been any stimulus, or has there just been cuts on wages?
there have been some stimuli for the companies that suffered from Corona.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the medical field goes, I mean, the Corona situation, like honestly, we could be talking for a long time about it but to briefly sum it up, there were some payments that went to some doctors,
Mm-hmm.
but there was also a lot of outrage because some people received very, very minor compensations for working with Corona patients. Others have received
Now,
quite a
hold
lot,
on.
actually. It
Just
was
one question. When it comes to the payments, now since your country is open, is it like a hazard payment? Since you're dealing with the coronavirus, they're going to give you a little extra because of what is
no, no,
happening?
no. It's not a hazard compensation. It's a compensation because their work was very limited.
Mm-hmm.
Also, most of our country's economics come from export, and it's export from Russia to Russia and from Russia. So Russia and everybody else closed their borders. And since we had borders opened, right? But nobody else had their borders opened outside of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter if we have our borders open. The economy stops because we still can't export because everybody else is closed off.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And
And
probably not
then,
a lot of
well,
people are visiting because of fear of coronavirus as well.
yeah. So the economics still suffered quite a bit. And one final thing is that a lot of independent investigations have started pointing out that the economics of the country are going to offshores severely. Like the money from the government is taken straight into offshores and into the pockets of all the major political figures. Again, these are just rumors, but
Mm-hmm.
here's how the approximate system works. So uh, most of the companies are government based, and even small companies, they also require government regulations. Small businesses and literally everything. Uh, major some of the biggest and most major prominent companies have been working at a loss. In fact, they've been receiving funds as a support from the government for years now. A lot of the a lot of the companies would actually go bankrupt if without government crediting them. And I believe the number for 2020 is as high as 25% of the companies working at a loss.
Oh,
Or
wow.
like, and the profits from the others are not actually that big. They're not as important.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest profit for us is actually the technological field right now, which is growing in its popularity, and the highest wages are also there because it's mostly support coming from outside of the government and outside of the country as well. So people know how to run those companies as well. In a way, we're also seen as an offshore for the IT sphere. So kind of works favorably for us.
Hmm.
But anyways, so government companies, they sell their products not directly to the EU, not directly to Russia, but a lot of the products go to some offshores, and those offshores sell their products at a much higher rate to everybody else. So the people in charge of those offshores are the ones receiving all the profits, and it kind of results in this curious situation that the only people who benefit are the people from the offshores, and they are also very notable people in our politics. So
Hmm.
many people believe that the money is actually being drained out of the country.
Jesus.
Uh, Yeah, that's how it is.
Do you believe just not even the government, but just the country, even when it comes to business and just the citizens as well, that it's pretty corrupt in the society as well?
I don't believe that people who are not like I believe the higher ups are the ones that are really corrupt. I don't believe
Mm,
that common folk who obey those orders from the higher ups. I don't believe that common folk are as corrupt as the ones on top.
I see. Yeah.
And one brief mention about the current situation that I want to say is regime control. Um, I'm just gonna state one simple known fact is that we have the highest amount of law enforcement and military per capita in the entire world.
Oh,
Like
interesting.
there's a lot more police, and it's like at least maybe 3 to 4 times than the average
Hmm.
person. A lot of them are a lot of the people are involved in the army, in the military, and so on.
Do you
Well,
think that's a good thing, or you're probably not thinking is necessarily a good thing right now with the riots and everything else because that force is kind of being used against you guys?
yeah, it's there to enforce the regime
Do you
mainly.
feel like the daily life with a heavy police force basically deters crime, like regular everyday crime?
I actually kind of do because we
Hmm.
have really low crime rates actually.
Hmm.
And it has to do a lot with the people being really peaceful,
Yeah.
and a lot of it was the work of the police. The police are actually doing their job really, really well. I
Hmm.
mean, at least in my opinion, because I've also worked with a lot of patients who with like knife wounds, with who were punched a lot. Well, mainly knife wounds because that was the main theme of the hospital where I worked part time at, and and those investigations were conducted really swiftly, really well, and the people responsible for the wounds were always found very, very quickly. Well, they weren't always found, but they were found most of the time and very quickly.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty good working system in my opinion.
Hmm. Yeah.
So um, now let's briefly talk about how the previous elections have gone, like the ones before that. So in order for a president to be elected in our country, all of the candidates need to collect signatures from people. And the barrier is having at least 100K signatures. So if you have 100K signatures that people would like you to be a candidate for president, then you can register as a candidate. Then the candidates are allowed to conduct certain meetings and present their presidential programs. Once the election occurs, if a candidate receives more than 50% of votes, then they become the president of the country. If all the candidates receive less than 50% of the votes, then an additional round of elections is conducted between the most popular candidates.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's called a runoff election or something like that. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. I wasn't familiar with the term.
Yeah, we have it more in localized elections, say like about other because we have Democrat, Republican. I mean, those are the major two parties. So if a bunch of Republicans and Democrats are going, if they don't get 50% of the vote and stuff like that, then it goes to the runoff of the most popular two. So basically what you explained.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Now, ever since the 2010 elections, the scenario has actually been very similar. 2010, 2015, and even now 2020, the scenario has been quite similar. And I'm talking about those elections because these ones have started appearing in the public eye. Because a lot of the outrage has started to be filmed, has started to be registered on the internet, and people have started documenting the opposition and what the government does.
Mm-hmm.
So the elections have been quite similar. First and foremost, candidates are supposed to collect signatures, and they do so by conducting large meetings in the city somewhere. So they form a group, and representatives of those group ask people to put their signatures for a certain candidate. In starting from 2010, there were absolutely no meetings conducted for Lukashenko. Like nobody, nobody really knew how he kept getting his signatures. Because in 2010, he had 1 million signatures somehow without organizing a single protest. And I mean, not protest, but not a single
A
meeting.
meeting. Yeah, meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a meeting. And in this year, he collected 2 million signatures without conducting a single meeting. And
Mm.
people have been wondering how the fuck did that happen? Like,
Yeah.
actually. So it's presumed, I'm going to say presumed because the government officially denies any of its involvement, is that many of the people involved in his groups are leaders at certain companies. So like they receive certain benefits from joining the groups, and they force their workers to collect signatures, allegedly collect signatures for the president. If they don't do so, then they're going to receive then their work is going to suffer. They are not going to get their new contracts. They are going to get like lower wages and stuff. So they're just being threatened to put their signatures. Then a lot of the other candidates that tried to register, that organized meetings, that represented the opposition, they went missing as well, or suddenly dropped out of presidential campaigns. Some outrageous crimes were put on them. So the situation was like similar to Zakharenko and Goncharov, where they just disappeared. Some have disappeared without a trace. Some have decided they don't want to take part in the elections. Some others they've decided. They haven't decided. They were forcefully jailed and charges were put on them.
Damn.
So after the registration of the candidates, again, absolutely zero meetings have been conducted for the president. Not at least not any like major ones. Maybe there were a few, but there weren't a lot, and they weren't super popular. And finally, the president would win with approximately 80% of the votes, and the opposition would strike protests. All of the protests were essentially very underground. They went, not a lot of people knew about them.
Yeah.
And there were always provocations. So remember how we have a lot of riot police in our country, so like more than in any other country realistically.
Mm-hmm.
So they would they would make provocations, such as people running towards major buildings of the government and knocking on doors, like trying to bust in, trying to, essentially, there were provocations to present peaceful protests as violent. And then those protests would be quickly suppressed. And there were very little traces of them, of like what actually happened to them, because back in 2010, the internet wasn't super popular in our country.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a lot of difficulties going online. It was slow, it was unreliable. People were kind of whatever. Mobile internet was incredibly expensive and at its very earliest stages, so it was super slow as well.
Mm-hmm.
So people didn't really know, and TVs and major news publication and all the other major news publications, they showed those protests as being violent. Well, essentially, they said that the violence was started by the opposition, and look, our like angels of peace, known as the riot police, is trying to suppress them, and they also suffering. And also, a common theme that we've seen is that the internet goes down on the days of those protests. It's
Oh,
also
interesting.
a similar thing that has occurred this year. And I even told you about it. Like the first 3 days of the protests, the internet worked in an absolutely horrendous way. Like you
Mm-hmm.
had to get some pretty advanced VPNs in order to bypass the blocks.
Yeah, so basically we talked about a week ago and we've been communicating back and forth and basically he was saying that yeah, I mean basically what you were saying that like it's impossible to talk right now and I'm assuming that we wouldn't have as good a connection as we do now.
Yeah, we wouldn't. It's actually very convenient that we're starting so early for me because in the morning the internet is fine, dandy, and stable. But in the evening it gets progressively slower. Maybe it's due to the load because a lot of the people start using it. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
not excluding that. But there are also blockers of traffic being used. That's for sure
Mm.
because it doesn't work without VPNs as well.
Ah, I
There has
see.
been there has been less internet censorship in the past few days, and the protests have been a lot more peaceful now than
Mm,
before, though.
that's
Uh,
good.
there's a there's a new public meeting coming to honor the injured in like in an hour and a half about that time, but so the internet might go down
Ah,
at
I
that
see.
point. I'm using a VPN though, so it should be fine. It
Oh,
should
okay.
bypass blocks.
So
Uh,
I did hear one thing of what was it? Hold on, let me find her name really quick. Svetlana.
yeah,
I'm gonna
yeah.
just Sikhanovskaya. Sikhanovskaya.
Tikhanovskaya.
Yeah. Okay. Close enough. Yeah.
Yeah, you can use the name Svetlana.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
are going
So
to understand.
she fled to Lithuania.
Yeah, that's true.
I see. And just with everything you're talking about, people disappearing or dropping out and stuff like that, she probably felt like her life was in danger.
Yeah, I'm gonna address this in a little bit, okay?
Oh,
So
okay.
we don't have a lot of time left, I assume, but I still wanna briefly touch this campaign as well. I've already
Okay.
mentioned how the situation has looked from Lukashenko's side of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Like he didn't really do much and essentially won. But the build up for the election has also been very, very important. Like this is the point where I would like to start with the corona situation, but given how we don't have a lot of time, I'm just going to briefly mention how things turned out. In
Mm-hmm.
my opinion, the corona situation is one of the starting points in this electoral campaign for the distrust for the president, because we had no real no real visible measures for the people. The president himself, I mean, I think uh, the healthcare, the Ministry of Healthcare has done a mostly decent job at taking care of the corona. There were a lot of volunteers who helped along the way, some major websites, some prominent people who helped get protective equipment for the medical staff and also to help organize help for the people. But um, the government has essentially ruined the political situation for itself by saying a lot of outrageous things. First and foremost, Lukashenko has simply dismissed Corona as a psychosis. Like uh, it's on the internet. It's very famous. There are quotes of him saying that in order to not suffer from Corona, you need to drink vodka, do sports, and take saunas. You know, it's true. It's there on the internet, like literally. So the plan was to essentially not do anything about the corona and let us go by there are two scenarios, like the quick one and the long one for corona with those graphs. Like if you're going by the quick scenario, then your healthcare is likely to get overloaded and there's likely to be a lot of casualties.
Mm-hmm.
So we have chosen that scenario, and um, uh, and so our economics were never really closed. There wasn't like any global lockdown or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And the president just kept saying that corona is a psychosis and that it's going to go away eventually. Like it's not going to hit us. Like the flu, for example, goes away in like late spring and such.
Mm-hmm.
According to all expectations, the corona was going to hit us in the peak of the corona was going to hit us in late spring. And people initially thought that corona wasn't as dangerous, then that it wasn't going to hit us as hard, then it's nothing worse than the common flu for us, and so on and so forth. So a lot of that information was fed, but the situation didn't turn out this way, that we saw a lot of bad cases of corona as well. The other major source of distrust has been how our healthcare presented statistics on coronavirus. Is that we simply had publications of the total number of cases, like how many additional cases there were and how many people died, and it was severely underreported. Basically, Brazil tried to do the same, and they received a huge shitstorm
Mm-hmm.
for trying to do that. But we somehow haven't. So, in my opinion, the statistics for coronavirus were severely manipulated. We probably didn't have as few cases as the official stats say. We definitely had a lot more dead people from corona because because most of the time a diagnosis can be manipulated in our country. In our healthcare, certain people are not allowed to die from certain conditions. Like literally, you cannot put it as the cause of death. So, well, it's been a lot less strict nowadays, but it's
Mm-hmm.
been a common theme in the past 10 years. Is that alongside interventional cardiology, for example, people were not allowed to die from myocardial infarction in a hospital. Like if you wrote that a person died from myocardial infarction, there would be severe consequences for that and such. So the same thing, well, it's a working scheme. The same exact thing happened with Corona, where people were like, he died from an unidentifiable pneumonia, or he died from heart failure, and then the second cause of death maybe like unidentified pneumonia and such.
Mm-hmm.
It's just pretty horrible what some of the manipulations with statistics can look like, but this is how it kind of is.
Wow.
So it created a huge distrust towards the government and towards the president when the entire world was suffering. It was in the public eye how bad the situation was in Italy, how bad it was in the UK, in the USA, how many people died and so on. The reports were just horrible. And
Mm-hmm.
on top of it, we looked like it looked like the government didn't really give a shit much about its people or about the corona.
Hmm.
Like the president says that you're all stupid, the statistics tell you absolutely nothing, and everybody realizes that they are false, like they are underrepresented, and we had a lot of deaths from corona, that's for sure, but actually we somehow majorly got lucky, in my opinion. The UK introduced no real measures from the beginning as well. They've seen a really high surge in morbidity, and then they've also had a lot of people dying. Like Britain was leading in terms of mortality for a long while, if I remember correctly.
Hmm.
And then I have no idea why, but in my opinion, we simply got lucky that not as many people died from corona as they did in other countries. While I do think that the total number of deaths is greatly downplayed, I don't think that it's actually super high. Like something about it, mm, well, something happened that we just got lucky. We got lucky that not that many people died.
Yeah, my theory is I feel like more of the Western countries have a higher obesity rate versus a lot of the Eastern countries, and I feel like the lack of health, especially in our country. I mean, it's pretty objective. We're a pretty fat country, and so we have type 2 diabetes, and we have many other issues as well, versus a lot of the Eastern countries that don't have necessarily a higher obesity rate, which causes a lot of
Mhm.
other issues. And I feel like, I mean, it kind of, you have to go a country by country basis, but I feel like
Yeah.
a
Hmm.
lot, you guys, I mean, the amount you guys walk just alone comparatively to Americans. I mean, when I wake up in the morning, I take my steps to go into my car, I drive, and I take my steps to go in my office, and I sit and do whatever walking is in between. I obviously I'm healthier. I work out, and I make sure I take care of myself because I am a type 1 diabetic. If you I don't think I
Oh,
told you this. Yeah.
that's
So
actually
yeah. So you know, I'm skinny. I'm fit, and I do whatever I can to take care of myself. But just statistically speaking, the amount of steps that you guys take, because you guys probably use a lot more public transportation. Not a lot of people have cars over there, and you guys walk a much further distance. I mean, God, Russia was a great example of. God, I felt like I was walking just miles upon miles, or for you, you speak in
yeah,
kilometers and
yeah.
stuff like that. But I was walking a lot, and I lost I guess for you you do kilograms, so I probably lost
Nice.
4 kilograms or something like that for just being there for
That,
2 weeks on my
that's
first time.
nice.
Oh yeah, it's nice, and I felt better like doing it. So I believe that these countries, they get uh people who are just kind of naturally skinnier just with their lifestyle, who are a little bit more health conscious and stuff like that, are not doing so bad. And when you see in America, I mean, you guys probably make fun and make jokes about the obesity. A lot of Americans are fat, which is
Yeah, I mean,
somewhat true.
everybody makes those jokes.
Oh yeah, of course. And so I believe that it is kind of a wake up call to our country, especially, saying that we're not healthy just in general, and if we were healthier, there'd probably be a lot less deaths.
Yeah,
So I mean,
that's
that's kind of my opinion on it. So I don't know how your country is necessarily. I mean, of course you have some obese people, but generally speaking, you guys uh, probably have a better population that has better circulation compared
yeah,
to you
maybe,
probably have a lot less diabetes and stuff. That's just my opinion on it, but I could be wrong.
maybe, maybe. But
Yeah.
I'd be really interested in talking to you about the insulin situation in the US. But since we're running shortish on time, then we're gonna maybe if you want to talk about it some other time, it'd be interesting. Since
Yeah,
you're type
definitely. Yeah,
1
we can talk.
since you're a type 1 diabetic, I'm actually quite curious about the situation with insulin in the US because I heard it's pretty bad, but
Um,
getting better.
for me, I'm fine. I,
Oh,
I've been my mom's a diabetic too, so she kind of walked me through the ropes on how to do it. I've always had medical insurance and stuff, and so
oh.
I've been
Mhm.
fine. But again, that's anecdotal. I do feel like I have to work a little harder to make sure I have insulin and I have good
Yeah,
medical coverage
it's
and I have a
crazy
very good
expensive.
job. Yeah, it is pretty expensive, and I could kind of get into the politics of that. But overall, for me, I'm fine when it comes to insulin, my health, everything else. I'm fine. So, but yeah, moving on.
All
Kind
right,
of
yeah.
from the coronavirus. Yeah,
So
keep going.
so yeah, the coronavirus has been, in my opinion, one of the like last drops towards people's distrust for the government.
Hmm.
That now completes like the full cycle. Is that people don't like the way that the republic is regulated. They don't like the president having absolute charge of it. They don't trust our current president because he's been showing his bad side even more and more. And also, the people now start to realize that our economic situation is pretty bad. Low wages, lots of broken promises of fixing the situation. All of those have essentially never came to fruition. And a lot of the people's needs are now falling on deaf ears. Like you, this presidential campaign has been quite a shit show, and
Hmm.
the major difference between this campaign and the previous ones is that it has been extensively documented by all the public websites. So, in my opinion, the real oppositional movement started with Sergei Tikhanovsky, who is the husband of Svetlana, who is, well, now super famous. He was a blogger who created a YouTube channel called A Country for Life, well, a country to live in, which this is something how you could translate like a country to live in, would be a
Yeah,
more
that's
accurate.
her that's her alliance, the Country for Life. I see. Her
Yeah, yeah,
political party independent thing. Yeah.
yeah. So he created a YouTube channel called that, and he started going to regions and asking people about their lifestyle. Well, essentially doing what you're doing right now with me. It's like discussing their situation, discussing what's going on, how they could improve, whether they're happy or not, and so on and so forth. And he started getting a little bit popular. Some of his meetings, well, the coronavirus boosted him a little bit because the people's distrust started growing. The people's concerns about the government started growing, since it was an election year too.
Hmm.
And he started showing that people are not actually really that happy about the regime. Like they may not have a voice, a huge public voice, but they also starting to lose their fear in terms of talking. They are willing to talk about those things.
Hmm.
Uh, so some he started organizing meetings to gather signatures for himself, and in fact he wouldn't be getting he didn't really say that he wanted to collect a lot of signatures, but he said that he wanted to start the opposition because elections wouldn't be fair anyways.
Hmm.
So uh, one of uh, on in one of those meetings, there was a provocation. The reason I say it so confidently is because there are literally videos out there that he was jailed unfairly, and even Lukashenko later said that he directly gave the order to jail him, and in the next sentence he was literally saying, "What? I was protecting my country. Did I do anything wrong in that?" So yeah, this is about the lack of empathy, by the way. He has absolutely no, I mean, it's fear of the opposition and his lack of empathy is that he's completely out of touch with what the people think.
Mm-hmm.
So the video got a lot of publicity. On that video, a woman approaches Sergei and she screams wildly at him to like answer some outrageous questions about him. She's like touching him and so on and so forth. So he dismisses her. He says, well, she is a provocator. He doesn't push her. He doesn't do anything. He just leaves, you know.
Mm-hmm.
The woman runs towards two policemen. She tells them something, like, and a second later, like, there are just two police officers that are conveniently standing close to her, and those police officers talk to her for like 1 second, literally, no more than that. Like, she just shouts them something, and they start going after Sergei. Uh, then one of those police officers is gently put down on the ground. Like, I'm not exaggerating. There is a video. He's literally gently put down on the ground, and this officer pretends that he's been hurt. So like he grabs the stomach. He was a picture of him was then later shown sitting on a bench and like sitting on a bench, showing that he's visibly suffering and such. And there were even medical records, like he was taken to a hospital, and there were even medical records which said that he had a possible abdominal trauma, like possible, mind that.
Mm-hmm.
And so he got detained by the police after the officer was put down, and he has not been released ever since.
Jesus.
So afterwards, the video got crazy publicity. Everybody knew that this was super unfair. So people started organizing more meetings, and his group especially started organizing more of them. So they were met with riot police. Riot police have started dismissing them, like using forcefully, mind that. And his representatives also started getting jailed one by one. Even the drivers that were carrying this movement, even they got jailed. Uh, so uh, on the next day, conveniently, a new video on his channel popped up where he talked to some person, which was pre-recorded, but it was scheduled to post. You know how YouTube has
Yeah.
an option to schedule your video, so he did that, and it was posted the next day after he got jailed. And that video also got crazy publicity. And so everybody was like, wait, who is this guy? I mean, he talks legitimately good things. He was supposed to be an oppositioner. He got unfairly jailed, and he doesn't seem like a bad guy, in this case. And then his entire crew is getting arrested. The peaceful meetings and protests are getting forcefully ended. People are getting jailed and detained. And it's just pretty horrible. So this got a lot of publicity, and other candidates started to join in on the oppositional movement. The most prominent two ones were major political figures, Valery Tsepkalo and Viktor Babarika, especially Viktor Babarika, who was the favorite candidate to win these elections if he had actually been registered. He had a huge team of supporters who organized his campaign and a lot of lawyers. And there were a lot of bad things regarding this campaign. So Lukashenko talked a lot of shit about the opposition on TV publicly live. The signatures that I previously talked about that were collected by Lukashenko were also in the public eye. A lot of people reported being threatened to put their signatures for him. And Babarika was a person who started bringing these things to life. Like, his legal team filed a lot of complaints into the Central Electoral Committee to dismiss Lukashenko for breaking rules of the elections, because he was talking shit about other candidates. He was jailing unfairly other candidates. He was he was collecting signatures in illegal manners and so on and so forth. There's a large document that is also available with all of those problems. So Babarika was also jailed, and he was the leader of a major bank in our country. I mean, not a leader, I mean the head in charge of a major bank in our country for a really long time as well. So the bank was forcefully entered. There were a lot of documents were dug up. Some people who had their funds in the bank, they reported theft from their accounts, from their personal belongings.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a large, essentially it was presented as there being as a large corruption scheme that he was in charge of. So needless to say, the people didn't really believe that, because Babarika was essentially opposing Lukashenko in an open but calm and methodical fashion. Like, he was super calm about all of that. He wasn't forceful. He was very peaceful. He said that you should fight with legal means. He said that we are going to, we're going to peacefully protest all of that. And he was jailed, and that scheme apparently was uncovered. There hasn't been a trial yet, and the only reason somebody can not be registered as a candidate for the president, to be the president of Belarus, is actually if they have been damn, I forgot the word. If if the court found them guilty for whatever transgression, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there has still been no court regarding his situation. It's like the scheme is still being uncovered in the process.
Hmm.
But also all the major news publications that were government controlled, they posted large videos and news reports of the scheme, of how it worked, of the people involved in the scheme admitting that they were trafficking money and such. They essentially said that Babariko is in charge of all of those, and he is guilty and corrupted and terrible and so on. So so the funny thing is, when it came to discussing the registration of candidates, when that day came, uh, Babariko was actually not registered based on a recommendation from the Bureau of Forensic Investigations. And let me remind you that in charge of the Bureau of the Forensic Investigation is the president. So essentially, he wasn't registered by, he was jailed by president, and he wasn't allowed to become a candidate based on the decision of the organization controlled by the president. And the head of the Central Election Committee is also chosen by the president, so she didn't register him.
Wow.
Now,
So this is basically publicly known, and everybody knows this, and then they go into an election with who knows, he could have even won, maybe it would have been close or something like that. But he he gets 80% of the vote, and
yeah,
you have the riots, or not, the protests and everything, because everybody in the country pretty much, especially just in Minsk, is like, there is no way she only Svetlana got 10
yeah,
14% of the vote.
yeah. So another candidate that I mentioned previously, Valery Tsepkalo, also had a really popular campaign. He wasn't as actively an opposer. I mean, he was an opposer of the current regime, but he was he wasn't filing like any procedures against the president or spreading information about the stuff that's been happening. But he wasn't registered at an earlier point. He wasn't registered as a candidate because he didn't officially get 100K signatures.
Mm.
He did like over 100K, in fact, but a lot of those signatures were deemed as fake by the election committee.
Mm.
And this is a really interesting situation as well, because how exactly do you recognize that a signature is fake for somebody? You know, the data of the people who put those signatures is collected, their addresses, their phone numbers and stuff, and also their signatures. So it's easy to like call somebody and ask, did you vote, did you sign for this guy? And the person is going to say, yeah, I did, or no, I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But the election committee took like maybe half of his, maybe not half, but at least like 20 to 30%, if I remember correctly, of his signatures down, because they were recognized as illegitimate.
Mm.
And an especially prominent case was one of the was in one of the regions of Minsk, Frunzinsky, how do you say, Frunzinsky district,
Mm-hmm.
where the election committee actually replied to a lot of formal complaints. And they said that they don't think the dates of when those signatures were put, they are written in a different they're written differently than what the rest of the information about a signature, about the signer, looks like. So in order to confirm this, they sent a document into the Bureau of Forensic Investigations to conduct calligraphical research on whether those signatures were actually left by those people. And just so you know, well, calligraphical research is one of the most difficult and expensive ways of proving something. Like you
Mm-hmm.
need to prove that something is written by the exact same person.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, you need a lot of information about how the person writes. You need a lot of examples, and you need specifically trained personnel who is going to confirm that. This research took less than 3 days by the Bureau of Forensic Investigations. They confirmed that the signatures were fake. It took
Yeah,
less than 3
right.
days, to look over, to analyze over 5 to 6,000 signatures for them. Like, it's just absolutely mind-boggling and unreal.
Yeah.
Uh, Anyways,
Jesus.
and so he wasn't registered as well. And the only candidate that was actually left to register was Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. Sergei was detained, and he could not place a. He couldn't become a candidate because he was in jail. So he couldn't. They weren't providing him with visits where he could sign all the necessary documents to register as a candidate. So instead, his wife Svetlana took his role, as she was like, well, I'm going to do that. If he is jailed, detained, and there's no way for him to apply, then I'm going to apply.
Mm-hmm.
And she actually got 1K signatures, and she actually got registered.
Hmm.
So she was the only candidate of the opposition who was in fact registered. And all of the other groups of the opposition, with Viktor Babarika, with Tsepkava, they just united with her. So it was a pretty dumb move, in my opinion, on Lukashenko's part, because he not only got himself some really bad publicity for refusing all of those things in the public eye, but he also united the entire opposition in one leader. who he didn't perceive her as dangerous, and she's not a dangerous person. Like, she's a peaceful protester, but still there were a lot of smart and prominent people united behind her at that point, so who knew how to organize a campaign and help her.
Yeah.
And one more important thing is that the opposition kept growing because those outrages were literally everywhere. Those outrages, people read about them, people talked about them, everybody started looking at independent news sources, everybody started looking up to the opposition, and people started protesting. Like, every single problem that I mentioned previously was met with protests. Sergei being detained was met with protests. Then Tsepkalo's signatures were met with protests. Babarika's jail time was met with protests. Babarika not being registered as a candidate into the presidency was also met with protests. All of those protests were peaceful, and a lot of people were actually met with force during those protests. A lot of them were jailed, detained. There were a lot of unfair courts with literally no evidence for the people. Like, the courts were conducted in like a fast track fashion, you know. There were some papers that that said, we jailed this guy there, there, and there from the officials. He was resisting arrest. He was chanting stuff. He was being violent and stuff. When realistically, those people weren't violent. They weren't doing much of anything outside of standing on the streets. And they were detained. They were falsely accused, and they were charged for money by those courts. Many of the people who were there, they report policemen who had to give their sides of the story, and when asked about the events, their answers were like, I don't remember anything. I don't recognize this. There were a lot of arrests. I don't remember this. But what, like, even being asked what they were wearing, they were giving false evidence. Like, they were wrong about what the people were actually wearing at that point when they were standing on the streets.
Yeah.
And those people still got charged. They were found guilty. They were charged as well.
Jeez.
So, needless to say, all of this has just sparked even more resistance, because peaceful protesters were met with force, deliberately jailed. Even a lot of people who were just nearby, who were just going to do their own thing, they were just randomly taken in and jailed. And all of this has been in the public eye, and the opposition has just completely started growing and uniting under Svetlana. So with the elections approaching nearby, everybody was concerned that their votes wouldn't be protected at all, and that there was no way to know the true results, because the election committees would falsify the results anyways. How local commissions, there are some audio recordings of exactly how the commissions were falsifying their results, even local commissions. And well, we don't really have any means of tracking the higher ones, but there were a lot of ways proposed to take a look at how many votes we truly have. So, for instance, we have preliminary voting, like not preliminary, but the official day of the elections was on the 9th of August, but you could also vote on the days before. So a lot of people wanted to become observers of the situation, to observe how many people were going in and out of the election commissions, and also how And also people started an independent platform called Voice, where people were encouraged to take votes or to take pictures of their papers once they voted on, and submit them to independent Telegram bots that would calculate the overall results. And it's actually a large platform that received over 1 million of people, although it has been somewhat compromised, as far as I
Hmm.
know. And we still haven't heard of any of the results that they gathered, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But people were encouraged to do a lot of things to show that they were voting for the opposition, such as wear white bracelets and also fold their ballots in a very specific manner to show the commission that, you know, you can see how they are folded, you can see how many people are for Svetlana, so there's no way that you could count 80% of the votes for Lukashenko and stuff.
Yeah. What do
Then
you, oh, go ahead.
yeah, there was something else important that I wanted to mention, but you can go ahead with your own question
Oh
for
no,
now.
I was just going to kind of move on from it and ask a question. So if you have any other important details, you go ahead, or we could just kind of move on.
Oh yeah, one important detail is that observers also, there were also a lot of observers present on every commission
Mm-hmm.
before the official day of the elections, because most of electoral falsifications are actually conducted uh, on the days before the official day of the voting. In fact, in this year, it was reported that over 40% of the people actually voted before the nines. So everybody grew concerned about how that could have been. And a lot of observers reported their commissions signing up a lot more people than actually came in to vote.
Mm.
So observers would count like 20 people who visited the commission, but official results would say like over 100.
Hmm. What do you
And
think? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
well, yeah, this is like about the end of the of our presidential campaign, because on the nines, a lot the preliminary preliminary results, well, not the preliminary results were announced on the 10th, but on the nines, two official exit polls showed their information, citing that Lukashenko had over 80, like something like 83% of the votes. And the people who were trying to fight for fair elections, who were trying to protect their votes, who were shown just how little it actually matters what they do, uh, that that caused a really, really huge uproar. And after those 80%, a lot of people took it to the streets. In fact, I
Mm.
think the Nines was actually the most violent protesting day out of
Mm-hmm.
all of them, in terms of people's aggression, because there was some footage of people initiating fights with riot police on this day. Later on, there wasn't as much fighting; it was a lot more defending, and right now it's relatively peaceful. But then it was bad.
Hmm.
And also the internet went down on the nines. Like unless you had a VPN, it was pretty much completely inaccessible to everybody. Only a few websites would actually work.
Hmm. So what do you
But
think the American, or what do you think people outside of the country, what can we do to help?
well, it's about spreading the word. It's about showing your support. It's about uh, there are a lot of websites already that propose running your own representatives of
Mm-hmm.
your region, so that they would encourage parliaments of other countries to uh, to repress, to not acknowledge our elections, to repress the country, to sanction it heavily. And it's a working measure, in my opinion,
Hmm.
because we have very fragile economy, and without outside support, the government is going to collapse very, very quickly. This is
Yeah.
also one of the prime reasons that um, our leaders didn't want to close the borders when it came to coronavirus.
Hmm.
Uh, then another way that you can do is organize charity funds. Charity
Hmm.
funds help a lot, and people need uh, advocates for them. People need lawyers to defend themselves, even though the system is absolutely rigged in favor of the government. People still need help. People especially need medical help.
Hmm.
So there are some people I know who are working on funds to for medical aid, and I've tried to come in contact with some really popular charity funds, but they have pretty much ignored to provide support for the medical field,
Hmm.
sadly.
Um, yeah, I think you just kind of beautifully explained everything well. The whole time I was just sitting there, I was just like, Jesus, I never had just any thought that Belarus was anywhere near like that. I came into it not knowing anything, and now I feel like I'm blown away. It's crazy, and I I feel really bad what's going what you guys are going through right now. It sounds scary. Um, it's just so interesting. It's kind of maddening almost that you guys are going through this and how tyrannical it's turning in such a short time.
Yeah, it feels really bad, but we're managing it somehow. Luckily, we're not a very violent nation, so even with all of the bad things that are going on, there's even with all the bad things that are going on, people are still protesting in very peaceful fashion.
Hmm.
I feel like we've already. I mean, I assume that you're short on time, so we're not going to be able to discuss the riots that have been going on in the past few days, and especially not the Corona situation, which unfortunately we didn't have time for.
Yeah, it seems like there's so much stuff to unpack. It's crazy.
I did not actually expect me talking to take so long.
Oh
I'm
no,
gonna be
no,
honest.
that's perfectly fine. I want people to know this, and I want to help you by spreading the information to other countries. And I'm not the biggest podcaster out there, but I do everything I can for people to hear this and show people, what the actual realities of the situation are. And I believe this was a great conversation, and I do look forward to talking to you more about a lot of other issues as well. We could probably do an episode 2 somewhere in the near future. I obviously have things lined up here in the upcoming weeks, but is there anything? I know you don't want to I don't know how private you want to keep your things, but is there anything that you want to promote? Anything that you want to plug in?
Yeah, I mean, since I've decided to not be anonymous about it anymore. It at first the situation was scary, and it's still. I mean, it's still not entirely clear where we are heading, but at least it's a lot more peaceful now.
Hmm.
It could be a calm before the storm, as it usually happens, and especially how it happened in Ukraine, because it was peaceful for a while before turning incredibly violent.
Yeah.
But I also think one of the reasons we are able to one of the reasons we are able to actually fight as the opposition is because we are no longer recognized as well. The opposition is like a tag. It implies something bad. Like
Mm.
it has a
Anton? Hello? Hello? Oh, it looks like he cut out, guys. It looks like I'm probably just going to end the episode right here. Unfortunately, as you heard, we talked about a lot of things, and yeah, it was pretty crazy. So, unfortunately, yeah, he cut out. So I will end this episode now. Thank you guys for listening. I really wanted to bring light to what was going on, and my mind was just blown throughout this whole conversation. And obviously, he had so much to say, and I wish we had more time to say more. So we will definitely do a follow up episode. You guys could listen to me on YouTube, listen to me on Spotify, Apple Podcast. I just indexed myself the other week, and I'm on pretty much any platform. So feel free to give me a listen. Oh, here he is for a second. I'll have him wrap up really quick. Uh,
hello.
all right, you still there?
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
I assume it's getting close to the time of the major gathering today, so I assume my internet tried to go down.
Yeah. Well, I basically was just saying, we're pretty much all wrapped up in how amazing this conversation was. Is there
Right, yeah,
any social profiles? Is there anything that you want to share?
yeah, yeah. So let me finish my thought a little bit.
Uh,
So we're no longer the opposition because the opposition is kind of deemed as a bad word, and at the moment, it's the people like me, my friends, and a lot of the other ones who are taking it to the streets and trying to fight for their independence. Uh, it's just normal, common people right now, and I believe that showing that we are normal, average, everyday people is the way to go here. So
mhm.
I've decided to not do this anonymously. If anything is going to come, let it come. But uh, I'm not some kind of oppositional leader from the outside who is terrible and doing everything to protest the peace in our country. So I'm just
Mhm.
an average person who lives here, who is aware of the political situation that we are currently in, and who doesn't like it.
Yeah.
So I will leave some accounts that you can follow me on, and I answer questions on Reddit as well if you're for it.
Yeah,
Uh,
if you give me the social profiles, I will definitely add them in this description.
yeah, and I've been working on some things for YouTube that you can check out. I want to make a channel with some educational stuff. So enjoyed if you enjoy these kind of talks about some new info, something educational, and I hope that you could follow the YouTube channel, and I will post some pretty interesting stuff soon.
Cool. Well, Anton, thank you so much. This was awesome. I'm glad I stayed up till almost 2 o'clock to talk to you about this because this is what I want. This is what I love, and you've given me so much more insight now. You've probably given me more education on Belarus than any university can ever give me. Are you there?
Yeah,
Oh, okay,
I
you're
mean
cutting out.
that was the point of it all, and I'm cutting out. Okay, should be fine. Is it fine?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, I'm also happy to do that because to an outside observer, it may seem really wild what is happening here, but if you're familiar with the situation, then it just seems like the next logical step in the course of our country. And I'm
Yeah.
also happy to spread the news, and I'm really happy for this opportunity to be able to talk to at least a few people may who will listen to this, and maybe if this gets traction, then I'm just gonna be super happy that the outside world can now see what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, I'll do my best to, sh- shoot it out there so much for everybody to hear. But again, thanks for talking to me, and I will keep in contact, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you very much. I'm also really happy with all this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, thanks, Anton. We'll talk to you soon.